Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Vincent Brothers. Vincent Brothers was born on May 30th, 1962, in Long Island, New York. From a young age, he was known for his charisma, reliability, and diligence. He also served in the Marine Corps Reserves. After graduating from Norfolk State University, Vincent moved to California in the mid-1980s to pursue further education and eventually earned a master's degree. Despite having a successful career as a school administrator, Vincent's personal life was marred by tumultuous relationships. His two previous marriages ended in divorce. In 1988, while working at California State University in Bakersfield, Vincent had a daughter with his girlfriend. He took his girlfriend to court to establish paternity and was eventually awarded custody and visitation rights. Initially required to pay $350 per month in child support, this amount was increased to $771 in 2003. That same year, Vincent was convicted of wife abuse and received a 6-day jail sentence and probation. In 1992, Vincent married for the second time, but this marriage also ended in divorce in 1996 due to accusations of intimidation and physical abuse by his second wife. While serving as the assistant principal at Emerson High School, Vincent was accused of sexually harassing a colleague. The woman claimed that Vincent assaulted her at his home and took her phone to prevent her from calling the police. When she tried to report the incident to the police, she said police discouraged her from pursuing charges because she was afraid of Vincent's reputation. The harassment continued at school, with Vincent allegedly touching her inappropriately. The woman eventually resigned from her job as a teacher, citing an unfriendly work environment. The school district investigated Vincent due to his increasingly threatening behavior and threatening phone calls. Despite Vincent denying the allegations and having no disciplinary record, the school district transferred him to another school as a precaution. Vincent then began working at John C. Fremont Elementary School in Bakersfield, California, where he also became famous and respected. Vincent was especially known for ensuring the safety of students by taking them home after school. While teaching at Fremont Elementary School, Vincent met Joni Harper, the school's security supervisor and basketball manager. Vincent and Joni began dating and eventually married after the birth of their first child, Marcus. Their family grew with the arrival of their second child, Lindsay, in 2000. However, Vincent's infidelity caused him and Joni to divorce in September 2001. 2 years later, Vincent and Joni remarried in secret, and their third child, Marshall, was born 4 months later. Joni eventually opened up to her friends about the problems in her marriage. Unlike before, she expressed her fear that Vincent might harm her. However, to those around them, Vincent's family appeared happy and actively involved in the community, often attending local events and maintaining good relationships with others. From the outside, Joni and Vincent's marriage seemed stable. Joni continued to work as a basketball manager, pursuing her passion. However, no one expected that the tragic events hidden behind the family's happy exterior would soon emerge. 3 months before the tragic event, Vincent had moved out of the house due to frequent arguments with his mother-in-law, Ernestine. On July 6, 2003, Joni attended a church service with her 3 children, Marcus, Lindsay, and 6-week-old Marshall, as well as her mother, Ernestine. The family had lunch at Black Angus after the ceremony, then returned home for a nap. As was their custom, Joni and the children stayed in one bedroom, while Ernestine stayed in another room in the house. Tragically, the family was attacked in their home. The killer easily entered the house without signs of forced entry and shot Joni twice in the head while she was in the bedroom. Lindsay was also shot in the back. The noise alerted Ernestine, causing her to quickly arm herself with a .38 revolver and move toward the hallway to investigate. Unfortunately, she was killed before she could defend herself. The attacker shot Ernestine twice in the face, causing her to collapse in the hallway outside her bedroom. The attacker then entered the room and shot Marcus, followed by a fatal shot to the baby's back. Each shot was aimed very carefully. Instead of fleeing the scene immediately, the attacker went to the kitchen to get a knife and then returned to the bedroom. There, the attacker stabbed the victims multiple times in the back. On July 8, 2003, Kelsey Spann, Joni's best friend, became worried when she had not heard from Joni, Ernestine, and Joni's children since they went to church the previous Sunday. Kelsey decided to go to Joni's house to check on them using the key Joni had given her. When she tried to unlock the door, she found it difficult to open due to an obstacle. She then went to the back of the house and found an unlocked sliding glass door, which was unusual. Upon entering the house, Kelsey discovered Joni, her mother Ernestine, and Marcus, Lindsay, and Marshall, all dead. Kelsey immediately contacted authorities at 7 a.m. They arrived at the scene and discovered 5 family members brutally murdered. The family's peaceful home, located in a quiet neighborhood, became the scene of a horrific crime. The police investigation concluded that the family had been tragically killed on Sunday afternoon as they returned from church. Before leaving the scene, the perpetrator covered the bodies in the bedroom with blankets and pillows taken from other rooms. Detectives identified Joni as the primary target due to the severity of her injuries, suggesting the attacker had been extremely angry. Police were concerned about Vincent's safety and discovered he had been in Ohio. Detective Watts traveled to North Carolina, where Vincent was visiting his mother with his brother Melvin. When North Carolina police met with Vincent, they found him severely traumatized and unable to speak coherently, which did not provide many details about the investigation. Vincent's behavior was inconsistent with that of a murderer, and because he had been on the other side of the country when the murder occurred, police initially ruled him out as a suspect. He also provided receipts showing purchases made around the time of the tragedy, confirming that he had not been in Bakersfield, California, where the incident occurred. However, Detective Watts still doubted Vincent's innocence. Notably, Vincent never asked how his wife and children had died, which aroused suspicion. On July 11, 2003, Vincent had returned to Los Angeles without attending their family's memorial service, but Vincent had attended their funeral 5 days later. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Vincent had moved out of his family home in April 2003. Additionally, his wife, Joni, had been planning to divorce him again and had sought child support. Authorities also discovered that Vincent had had a history of violence against women, which had led them to take a closer look at his alibi. Upon further investigation, surveillance video from the store's checkout counters had shown that Melvin, not Vincent, had made the purchase at that time. When confronted, Melvin revealed that Vincent had told him to make these purchases in Vincent's name. Despite their efforts, police were unable to find any witnesses who had seen Vincent between the evening of July 4th and the evening of July 7th. Both Melvin and his family insisted they had not seen Vincent during this time. Although there was no direct evidence linking Vincent to the murder, police discovered he had some suspicious activities. Vincent had rented a car when he had arrived in Columbus, Ohio, and he had stayed at his brother's house. Police suspected Vincent had flown to Columbus on July 2, 2003 to visit family, then returned to Bakersfield on July 4, where the tragic incident had occurred on July 6. He was supposed to return to Ohio on July 7 and had arrived late that evening. Law enforcement had conducted a thorough inspection of the Dodge vehicle, paying special attention to its radiator and air filter. To help identify insects found in the car, investigators had enlisted the expertise of Dr. Lynn Kimsey from the Bohart Museum of Entomology at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Kimsey carefully had analyzed the insects and identified more than 100 species, including several species found only in the western region beyond the Rocky Mountains. The presence of some insects suggested that Vincent had moved at night. By carefully analyzing the insects, Dr. Kimsey had been able to plot a path that showed the car had traveled west from Ohio. Investigators later had tracked down the 5 previous car renters and confirmed that none of them had driven the car to California or near the Rocky Mountains. Police also had examined photographic evidence and found the end of a rubber glove in the laundry room. DNA testing showed a match. It belonged to none other than Vincent Brothers. Detective Watts had discovered that Vincent had been planning to leave town and had begun selling his assets, including putting his house on the market. As a result, Vincent had been arrested on April 30, 2004 and charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began in 2007, with prosecutor Lisa Green leading the case. The prosecution argued that Vincent's motive for the murder had been financial, suggesting he had acted out of fear of having to pay child support due to his impending divorce from Joni. The prosecution portrayed Vincent as a serial adulterer who often had disappeared for long periods of time and who could become violent. To support their case, the prosecution called several witnesses, including Dr. Lynn Kimsey, who testified that the insects found in the Dodge were consistent with insects commonly found along Interstate 70. This testimony was further supported by evidence showing 5,424 miles had been driven from July 2 to July 11 in accordance with the prosecution's statement. However, when Melvin had appeared in court, he tried to change his previous testimony, claiming that he had lied to the police about Vincent giving him a credit card to use. In response, the defense presented an expert on high-speed driving, who argued that maintaining an average speed of 70 miles per hour during the trip from Ohio to California had been extremely difficult. The defense also presented its pathologists, who testified that the murders could have occurred as late as Monday morning, July 7, 2003. The defense also had presented interrogation tapes to prove that Melvin had been pressured by police to change his statement. Additionally, they called a witness who claimed to have seen a car accident involving Vincent on Sunday morning, in which a boy on a bicycle had collided with Vincent's rental car at an intersection. Although the incident had not been reported to the police due to the lack of damage or injuries, the prosecution attempted to verify the story. Vincent had taken it upon himself to defend himself. He had strongly denied all accusations about his married life and had firmly denied the accusation of murdering his family. Throughout his testimony, Vincent had become emotional and had shed tears several times. The prosecution had called Carla Tuya, principal of Franklin School, as a witness. She had testified about her past relationship with Vincent, which had begun in 1996 when his son was born and had ended in 2002 when she had decided to end it. Carla revealed a shocking secret that she and Vincent had been intimate just weeks before the family tragedy, directly contradicting Vincent's previous denials about everything. This admission had damaged Vincent's claim to fidelity to his family. The prosecution had argued that the crime had been carefully planned in advance. Thanks to knowing the family's Sunday habits, the murderer had gained an advantage and had had the opportunity to strike. The perpetrator had taken advantage of this and had waited until the whole family was asleep, then had used the spare key to enter the house through the sliding glass door and had killed each family member. On May 15, 2017, Vincent had been found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, making him eligible for the death penalty. The jury had reached this decision after hearing testimony from 137 witnesses and deliberating for nearly 2 days. After the verdict, Vincent had been removed from the courtroom and had been returned to the Luro detention facility under tight security. Then, on September 27, 2007, Dirk County Superior Court Judge Michael Bush had sentenced Vincent Brothers to death by lethal injection. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Joseph Saunier. Joseph Saunier was born in 1955 to a respected family of doctors in Shreveport, Louisiana. From a young age, he aspired to follow in his family's footsteps and become a doctor. With exceptional abilities, Joseph earned a Bachelor of Science in Medical Science from the University of Baton Rouge in 1976. He then applied to Louisiana State University in Shreveport and began working at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. Joseph effectively balanced his university studies and work. He consistently refined his knowledge through hands-on experience at the hospital. The hospital management recognized Joseph's success and dedication, and in his final year of training, he was appointed chief resident. After completing his studies, Joseph chose to specialize in pathologic anatomy and went on to become a pathologist and laboratory director in Leck, Texas. Joseph's life was marked by personal tragedy, including the loss of the woman he loved, Becky. His 27-year marriage, which he considered happy, ended in divorce when his wife fell in love with another man. Joseph accepted her decision and agreed to the divorce, believing that the woman he loved had found happiness. Joseph had a strong sense of responsibility and nobility. After his divorce from Becky, he maintained a warm relationship with her and continued to support their 2 sons. 2 years later, Becky was killed by her new husband. Joseph was shocked by her death. He often thought about their past family life and mourned her loss. Despite his own grief, Joseph remained a source of strength for his family. He took care of the funeral expenses and helped his sons cope with the trauma. His sons later credited his support for helping them overcome their pain. The tragedy had a profound impact on Joseph. He devoted himself to his work and raising his sons. However, the grief finally gave him the motivation to change his life. He decides to start a new chapter in a new city. In 2007, Joseph moved to Leck, Texas, with his sons, where he became the chief pathologist at Covenant Health System. Feeling the need for a change, Joseph enrolled in a local dance studio. He enjoyed the classes and met new women, which helped fill the void in his life. A few times, Joseph attempted to form connections with his dance partners, but it never worked out. That was until Michelle Tina walked into his dance class on a warm summer evening. Her elegance, poise, sense of humor, and sparkling eyes immediately caught his attention. Her radiant smile illuminated the room, and Joseph knew right then that she was the one he had been searching for. Michelle, too, noticed Joseph's confident and respectful demeanor on the dance floor. As they danced together, the 47-year-old Michelle and 57-year-old Joseph found that they complemented each other perfectly. As they continued to dance together, they grew closer with each passing session. Eventually, Joseph asked Michelle out on a date, and she agreed. This marked the beginning of what seemed like a happy new chapter in both of their lives. Michelle possessed an irresistible charm that had a profound effect on men. Michelle was a classic example of a femme fatale, a woman with an undeniable magnetism that drew attention and sparked passion in those around her. Michelle, like Joseph, is also starting a new life after personal emotional breakdowns. She is running away from the fear and anxiety associated with Mike Dixon, owner of a private clinic for cosmetic surgery. Michelle met Mike in 2008 when she came in for Botox injections. At first, there was just casual social interaction between them, then light flirting followed and they began a romance. Michelle is a successful and free woman. She worked as an executive in the NFL, built a successful career, and didn't lack for anything. Mike, on the other hand, is bound by his marriage. A few months after living a double life, his wife discovered his affair with Michelle and filed for divorce after 20 years of marriage. Mike is so captivated by Michelle that he barely notices that he is losing everything. Mike left his wife for Michelle, even though she never announced she would marry him. When Mike doesn't get the attention he expected, he tries to pressure Michelle, which scares her. Michelle recognized Mike's manipulative behavior and desire to take complete control of her life. This realization caused her to end the relationship. In 2010, Michelle and Mike went their separate ways. However, even after the breakup, Mike continued to pursue Michelle, urging her to return. His obsession exceeds the limit, forcing Michelle to find a way to escape Mike's control. Michelle moved to Lech to start anew, where she met Joseph, a charming and kind-hearted man. They quickly connected, and their relationship blossomed into true love. Joseph's sons and relatives welcomed Michelle with open arms. Joseph spared no expense in giving her gifts, taking her to the most luxurious restaurants and private clubs, and giving her romantic vacations. As Joseph realized he had found his perfect match, he took Michelle to Los Angeles and proposed to her in front of his entire family. Michelle, 47 at the time, was smitten with her new partner and frequently expressed her love for him on social media. However, her ex-lover, Mike Dixon, couldn't help but notice these declarations of love. Mike is furious when he discovers that Michelle has moved away and is planning to marry Joseph. He realized he couldn't win her back but still dared to propose that they rekindle their past relationship, suggesting they become lovers again. Michelle firmly rejected his proposal, refusing to engage in a love triangle, and immediately informed Joseph about Mike's suggestion. After some time, they started to feel like they were being watched. At one point, they even noticed something that looked like a camera flash through the backyard window, but they didn't pay much attention to it, not realizing the seriousness of the problem. The situation got out of control on July 11, 2012, when a gardener came to Joseph's house to discuss a garden renovation project. When the landscaper arrived at the home, he tried to contact Joseph but got no response. He saw an open door and, thinking Joseph might not be able to hear him, went inside. The house was in disarray, and there was a bullet hole near the front door, indicating a possible intruder. The landscaper cautiously went further inside, looking for Joseph. In the garage, he found Joseph lying in a pool of blood on the floor with no signs of life. Joseph's body had stab and gunshot wounds, leading the landscaper to think the perpetrator might be nearby. He immediately left the house and called for help. At 2:48 p.m., the police department received the call, and several patrol cars were sent to the scene. When the officers arrived, they found Joseph Sonnier. Medics confirmed that Joseph had died. The incident shocked the public, as it happened in one of the city's safest and most affluent neighborhoods, where crime is extremely rare. Joseph, a respected professional, was known for his calm and kind nature, and it seemed he had no enemies who would want to harm him. Although a window was broken, it was clear that the incident was not a robbery, as nothing was missing from the house. However, a bottle with a hole shot through its bottom was found at the scene, suggesting it was used as a makeshift silencer for a gun. A forensic team arrived soon after to collect evidence, and it appeared that the perpetrator was inexperienced, as they left behind many traces. DNA from the bottle and blood samples were sent to a lab for further analysis. Detectives interviewed neighbors, but none of them reported seeing or hearing anything suspicious. There were no CCTV cameras near the house. According to the investigation, the perpetrator entered through a large window overlooking the backyard, making the attack unexpected. In the dining room, the attacker confronted Joseph and started shooting. It is likely that the wine bottle was used as a silencer at this point. Blood stains in the hallway suggested that Joseph was still alive after being shot. He entered the garage, where the attacker caught up with him and stabbed him multiple times. An autopsy revealed 5 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds. The circumstances suggested that the murder was not random, but the identity and motive of the killer remained unknown. The investigation focused on the people closest to the victim. During an interview with law enforcement, the victim's fiancée, Michelle, reported strange things in the months leading up to the murder. She believed Joseph was being stalked. Michelle had seen a stranger lurking outside Joseph's house, watching the door and windows. She also mentioned that Joseph had received persistent calls and texts in the period leading up to his death. Although officers confirmed this information, they initially thought the calls and messages were from other women with whom Joseph was allegedly having relationships, as witnesses claimed he was in contact with multiple women at the time. Investigators questioned Michelle about whether she knew of other women involved with Joseph. Michelle claimed she was unaware of any other women. Joseph's sons also denied the possibility of their father having mistresses, stating that infidelity was not in his character. Despite this, investigators continued to explore a motive of jealousy for the crime. During the subsequent interrogation, Michelle succumbs to the pressure and reveals that she knows several women who may be involved in the crime. According to Michelle, these women are ex-girlfriends who often stalk Joseph. Although he ignored them, they continued to express their displeasure about his upcoming wedding to Michelle. The women in question include a woman from Florida who persisted in contacting Joseph even after he revealed his relationship with Michelle. There was also a nurse, Joseph's colleague, who often called and wrote to him. Additionally, a woman whose daughter sent a letter accusing Joseph of abandoning them shortly before the murder. In the same interview, Michelle mentioned Mike Dixon for the first time. She hadn't thought about Mike spying on her and Joseph before, because Mike stopped paying attention to her after she refused to be his lover. Michelle assumed that Mike had accepted her decision to marry Joseph and move on with his own life. The police visited Mike. He cooperated and spoke with the detectives. Mike revealed that he had been deeply in love with Michelle and had even divorced his wife to pursue a future with her. However, after Michelle rejected him, Mike gave up. He started a new relationship with a younger medical student who corroborated his alibi. At the time of the crime, Mike was at work and then spent time with his new girlfriend, which confirmed he couldn't have been involved. The investigation encountered significant obstacles. Every suspect, including Michelle, had a solid alibi, leaving detectives stumped. They searched for enemies of Joseph or individuals who might benefit financially from his death. But no new leads emerged. Unfortunately, forensic analysis does not provide any information about an individual, so police cannot identify the owner of the DNA found at the crime scene. Just as the case seemed hopeless, the police received an unexpected call from Paul Reynolds. Reynolds reported that his roommate, David Shepard, had recently confessed to a murder in Leck and then attempted to take his own life but was saved. According to Reynolds, a neighbor shared specific details about David's crimes with him, including details that only a few detectives knew, such as the use of a glass bottle as a silencer. This new information led police to conclude that Shepard was indeed connected to the crime. The witness came forward claiming that David was not the mastermind behind the crime, but rather a person who was hired by an unknown doctor involved in plastic surgery. Police launched an investigation into the new suspect and discovered that Mike Dixon was the person who hired David. When questioned at the police station, David began to confess and revealed that Mike Dixon had indeed hired him to commit the crime. According to David, he and Mike met at a bar while both were going through difficult breakups and formed a friendship. Mike shared his sadness over his lost love, Michelle, who was now engaged to someone else. He claimed that he couldn't move on and was willing to do whatever it took to win her back. David alleged that the initial plan was to discredit Joseph, Michelle's current partner, in the hopes that Michelle would leave him and return to Mike. However, David claimed that murder was not part of the original plan. First, women were paid $1,000 each to pretend to be Joseph's mistresses and pursue him. Additionally, a letter arrived from a woman claiming Joseph had abandoned her and their child. Joseph consistently denied these allegations, and Michelle believed him. It was later revealed that the camera flash seen by the couple was actually the light from David's cell phone flashlight. David had been driving to their house to create the illusion of surveillance. Funded by Mike Dixon, who covered gas and other expenses. When these tactics failed to break the couple apart, Mike plotted a more extreme solution. He offered David 3 silver bars, valued at around $110,000, to kill the pathologist. David agreed and received one of the bars as a deposit, which he immediately sold at a pawn shop. According to David Shepard, the situation escalated out of control when he went to Joseph's house. He claimed the shooting was unintentional, and that after shooting Joseph, he became afraid and Joseph began to run away. David shouted to check on Joseph but received no response. He then followed Joseph into the garage, where he found Joseph lying still and heard his last breath. David rushed to check Joseph's pulse and confirmed that Joseph was dead. David admitted to stabbing Joseph several times but could not remember the exact number. David also admitted that he considered calling for help using Joseph's phone, but ultimately chose not to. Instead, he put the phone back, mutilated Joseph's body, and then went to Mike's house to get the rest of the gold before attempting to take his own life. According to David, he didn't fully understand what he was getting himself into. When he faced Joseph, he realized he could not continue killing. If it weren't for an accidental gunshot, Joseph might still be alive. Mike Dixon was arrested by the police on the same day and charged with first-degree murder. This was based on testimony from David, as well as a large amount of other evidence that included incriminating phone calls and text messages where Mike made explicit confessions. When Mike Dixon was first interviewed by detectives, they had hoped he would confess to the crime. However, he denied everything and asked for a lawyer, which led to a lawsuit. David Sherd, who had been involved in the crime, made a deal with the prosecutor where he pleaded guilty to his role and gave up his right to appeal the sentence. As a result of this deal, David received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, instead of the death penalty. Mike Dixon, on the other hand, maintained that he was not guilty, despite the circumstantial evidence against him. However, in a surprising turn of events, David, who was a key witness for the prosecution, changed his story during the trial. Under oath, David claimed that he had committed the crime alone and that Mike Dixon was not involved. He said that the silver bars found at the scene were meant to be used as an investment in a business that the two of them had planned to start. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and a retrial was declared. The second trial occurred in 2016, resulting in Mike's conviction for first-degree murder and a life sentence without parole. However, his lawyer successfully appealed the judgment, and it was overturned. Mike was released on $2 million bail, but the case was far from over. The prosecution sought to reinstate the original sentence through the state's highest criminal court, which would have otherwise led to a third trial. On February 11, 2019, the prosecution's motion was granted, and in April 2020, Mike's bail was revoked, prompting a new arrest warrant. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ultimately reversed the lower court's decision, reinstating Mike's life sentence without parole. The judge ordered Mike to continue serving his sentence, and he is currently incarcerated in a Texas prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Borden family. Michael and Catherine met in school, bonding over homework and walks. They became inseparable friends, sharing secrets and learning from each other. Their friendship blossomed into romance, and Michael eventually asked Catherine on a date, declaring his love. They got married in a beautiful ceremony, vowing to love each other through life's ups and downs. After 10 years, the Borden family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania, a peaceful town founded by the Moravian Church in 1756. The town's faithful residents, including Amish families, sought refuge from modern chaos, living simply and avoiding modern tech. The devout Bordens chose Lititz for its ideal setting to raise children, surrounded by calm and serenity. Michael was an active member of the local church community, where he taught Sunday school lessons. His wife Catherine managed the household and supported him in his community work. While he focused on spiritual growth, Michael also worked as a manager at a printing company to provide for their everyday needs. Over time, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Large families like theirs were common in Lititz, where parents hoped to protect their children from the outside world's hardships and dangers. Regular church attendance, youth groups, and homeschooling were a big part of family life. Interactions between families were mostly limited to religious gatherings and celebrations. Michael and his wife built a peaceful home life, raising their kids in faith and discipline. When their eldest sons left for university, the 3 younger kids continued homeschooling, pleasing their parents. Neighbors and friends praised the kind, responsive, and interesting kids: Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel. Kara, the eldest daughter, challenged traditional values in her teens. Despite her dad's disapproval, she joined the soccer team, snuck out to discos, and did forbidden things. Her dad was troubled, and talks often ended in arguments and her running away. Kara sought romantic relationships and showed interest in boys. In 2005, David, 18, and Kara, 14, connected at a homeschooling support group. They formed a close bond, hiding it from their parents, and used social media to exchange messages, pouring their hearts out. They crafted coded messages to keep their communication private. Kara and David's letter exchange wasn't enough, so they secretly met in person. At first, they took innocent walks, but their friendship blossomed into romance. They snuck out to discos, spending nights together. David, older, had experienced first love, while Kara's inexperience made her feelings overwhelming. Her joy was radiant, but her obedience to her parents was feigned, driven by fear of discovery. But sooner or later, every secret is exposed. One day, Kara couldn't keep her secret hidden anymore and confided in her sister. She showed her a photo of David, told her about how they met and how they were deeply in love and willing to overcome all obstacles to be together. They were even planning to run away to be together. However, Kara's sister was worried about her and told their mother about their planned elopement, which ultimately revealed the secret of the young lovers. One early morning, Kara snuck back home, feeling elated after her date with David. But her mother was waiting in her room, clearly aware of her secret. At breakfast, Kara's parents forbade her from seeing David, deeming him unsuitable due to their concerns about violence and drugs. Angry and disappointed, Kara's father grounded her. That night, Kara spent her free time at David's house. At 5:30 a.m., David drove Kara back to her neighborhood and dropped her off near her house. They agreed that once Kara was safely back in her room, she would send him a text message to let him know she was okay. However, the message never came. David tried calling her home phone several times and sent her a few messages on social media, but he didn't hear back from her. An hour later, Kara finally got in touch with him, explaining that she had gotten caught by her parents and asked him to come over so they could talk to him. David arrived on time, but Kara's parents were fiercely opposed. Her dad forbade David from seeing Kara, deeming her too young for a relationship. David's declarations of love fell flat, with her dad threatening to call the police if he saw them together again. The emotional confrontation ended with Kara grounded and David leaving, feeling rejected and heartbroken for the first time. The lovers' separation was agonizing. They devised a plan to deceive everyone by pretending to break up while secretly continuing their affair. In public, they convincingly played the part of former lovers, not even greeting each other. Kara's parents were convinced they'd protected her from a youthful mistake. However, David missed Kara terribly, often reading Shakespeare and imagining openly serenading her like Romeo. David Ludwig took drastic measures by calling Kara's home to request a meeting with her father, Michael. On November 13, 2015, the young man arrived at the Borden residence, determined to discuss their plans to get married. Ludwig confessed his love for Kara and their intentions to Michael, but he received a dismissive response, saying it would never happen. Prepared for this reaction, Ludwig, fueled by anger, pulled out a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he walked towards the front door. Next, he targeted Kara's mother, Catherine, shooting her while she sat in a chair. Ludwig then searched the house for Kara, calling out her name, but she was nowhere to be found. He got into his car, started the engine, and began to drive away. That's when he spotted Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car, expressing her desire to escape and start a new life with David. They fled the city in David's red car, leaving the chaos behind. Kara Borden was missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found dead. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, which led them to track the teenagers. The footage also showed that Kara didn't resist and had willingly gone with David Ludwig. As a result, the charges against Ludwig for abducting Kara were dropped. Alerts were issued to police across the East, including in Pennsylvania and Indiana, as the couple was spotted heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a vehicle matching the description parked near a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. Police rushed to the area, but the car was already gone. State police were alerted, and they spotted the car around noon on Interstate 70 in Belleville. David Ludwig got onto the interstate, leading police on a high-speed chase at 90 to 95 miles per hour on a two-lane highway. According to State Trooper David Cooch, who was involved in the pursuit, Ludwig drove extremely recklessly and dangerously, causing multiple accidents, much like in an action movie. The district attorney announced that, despite the initial kidnapping charge being dropped, they would still face charges for the brutal murder of Michael and Catherine Borden. David Ludwig and Kara Beth Borden went on the run following the tragic incident, evading authorities for approximately 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. While Kara Beth was not charged with any crime, David Ludwig was detained without bail, facing charges of murder and abduction. In the aftermath, Kara was taken in by relatives and church members for care. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, following a high-speed chase that ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the murder of the Bordens, a crime allegedly committed after a prolonged dispute. Ludwig confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm, stating that he had deliberately intended to shoot the Bordens if they got in his way, and that he did so. During a search of his vehicle after his arrest, no weapons were found. However, when the police searched his home, they discovered an arsenal of 54 firearms, which belonged to his father, a hunter who had taught Ludwig how to handle weapons. The police also found an 18-minute video on a laptop in his home, which showed Ludwig discussing plans to invade another family's home, armed with weapons. The plan was abandoned due to the presence of too many cars. Although the police declared Kara Borden a victim in the case, Ludwig claimed that surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove that she was not abducted. He did not resist extradition to Pennsylvania, and a judge ordered him held without bail. Ludwig was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation, and a preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of Ludwig, who was responsible for the deaths of 2 adults in front of their children, was brief, as detailed in court documents. Caitlin, Kara's 13-year-old sister, told investigators that her parents were killed after arguing with David Ludwig for about an hour. According to Caitlin, Ludwig shot her father, and she then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, which likely killed her mother. Afterwards, Ludwig ran through the house, calling out to Kara. In June 2006, David Ludwig agreed to a plea deal with District Attorney Donald R. Totoro, who had originally sought the death penalty. As a result, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years. He was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Kara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by legal counsel. In November 2005, it was reported that the charge of abduction against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Kara had voluntarily left with Ludwig, as supported by written statements. Ludwig's lawyer claimed that Kara had accompanied David voluntarily during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance footage showed that she had multiple opportunities to escape. Kara herself admitted that she had run after Ludwig as he left her house. Kara Beth Borden was identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and as a result, the Lancaster County District Attorney did not file criminal charges against her. This decision was influenced by her actions during the investigation and the digital evidence collected from emails, blogs, and texts exchanged with Ludwig. A memorial service was held at Lancaster Bible College, where Kara Beth, surrounded by her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. As a sign of respect and remembrance, the neighborhood adorned their mailboxes with white ribbons. This tragedy left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. David Ludwig was transferred to Indiana's State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove to serve his life sentence for murdering his girlfriend's parents. He was chosen for the prison's youthful offender program, designed for inmates 15 to 20, which focuses on teaching self-responsibility, discipline, and respect for others. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 life sentences for fatally shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in 2005 after they barred him from seeing their 14-year-old daughter. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling against life imprisonment for minors, but the PA Supreme Court denied his petition, agreeing with a lower court that he's not entitled to same consideration since he was 18 at the time. David Ludwig will spend life in prison. The community struggled to understand how well-raised kids committed evil. Despite Christian homeschooling, tragedy struck, leaving questions if parents overlooked or failed to convey values. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Samadi Fonseca Fernandez. Samadi was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Her family and early life are not well documented. She spent her childhood in an area called Cuba, where she lived with her mother, Sonia Fonseca. Samadi attended a local school, where she demonstrated a challenging and conflicted personality from an early age. She had difficulty accepting rejection and often used force or deception to get what she wanted. People who knew her recall that Samadi's striking appearance and perfect figure made it easy for her to charm men, but she struggled to maintain relationships. Her beauty and charisma were matched by her greed and vanity, which led her to prioritize material wealth and self-interest above all else. This attitude often discouraged potential partners. Additionally, Samadi became intensely jealous and aggressive after brief relationships. Samadi's doll-like appearance led to her working as a Barbie lookalike at a large Universal bookstore for several years. This earned her a flattering nickname that stuck with her throughout her life. After high school, Samadi had in love with a successful local TV journalist named Osvaldo Fernando Ballery, who was 16 years her senior. Samadi had a long and serious relationship with Osvaldo, with whom she had 2 children, Christopher and Christina. However, due to constant scandals and jealousy, they separated in 2012. After Osvaldo's sudden death, it was discovered that he had not included Samadi in his will. Samadi took matters into her own hands and seized Osvaldo's house, changing the locks to prevent his relatives and heirs from entering. She also took some valuable items that belonged to Osvaldo. His family members were outraged and went to court to accuse Samadi of theft. The police eventually forced Samadi to leave the house, but she was not charged with a crime. Samadi had other relationships, including one with Miguel Angel Perez, with whom she had a daughter named Maria. This relationship was reportedly official, but ended in divorce after a few years. Samadi allegedly gave her youngest daughter her lover's surname without his knowledge or consent, contradicting claims that she was unmarried at the time. Interestingly, some of her lovers have mysteriously disappeared or died under unclear circumstances, yet this trend went unnoticed for a long time. For instance, one of Samadi's lovers went missing shortly after deciding to end their relationship with the reportedly temperamental and aggressive woman. Despite relative suspicions of her involvement, his disappearance remains unsolved due to lack of concrete evidence. Another former lover, Diaco, met a tragic end after breaking up with Samadhi. His murder was initially attributed to a botched robbery, but the perpetrators were never caught. Speculations about Samadhi's role in the crime persisted, albeit without solid proof. Her most notable alleged victim was Gerardo Cruz, a Costa Rican native born in December 1992 in San Jose. Gerardo never knew his biological father, who left the family before his birth. His mother, Ana Patricia, later married Hermes Rodriguez, who adopted and raised Gerardo as his own. Gerardo's younger sister, Milena, was born a few years after him. He had a peaceful and carefree childhood and youth. Gerardo attended a regular school, enjoyed motorcycles, and met his true love, Carol, at a young age. By 23, he, Carol, and their 4-year-old daughter Genesis moved into his aunt and uncle's house in San Sebastian, a suburb of the city. Gerardo took a job at a local bakery to support his family. They were happy, especially with the news of a second child on the way. In the summer of 2015, Gerardo met Samadhi, a 40-year-old woman who regularly visited the bakery. She was attractive, fashionably dressed, and flirtatious. As Samadhi aged, she began to have relationships with younger men, likely flattered by their attention. Despite their nearly 20-year age difference, Gerardo became infatuated with Samadhi and started secretly meeting with her. She visited the bakery almost daily, catching the attention of other employees. Samadhi often brought her 19-year-old daughter, Christina, to the bakery. Initially, Gerardo balanced his family life and secret meetings with Samadhi without either woman knowing about the other. However, Gerardo soon let his guard down, boasting to friends and colleagues about his relationship with Samadhi, describing her as a terrific mistress who spoiled him with gifts. Rumors about Gerardo's affair soon reached his mother, who attempted to persuade him to end the relationship. The affair was short-lived, ending in October 2015, when Samadhi discovered that his mistress, Gerardo, was married with a pregnant wife and a young daughter. Upon learning this, Samadhi became enraged. She began harassing Carol, Gerardo's wife, with threatening calls and messages, warning her that Gerardo would be harmed if he didn't return to her exclusively. Gerardo apologized to his wife and reconciled, keeping their family intact. He underestimated Samadhi's malice, thinking she would move on and calm down after the breakup. However, Samadhi's vindictiveness was more intense than Gerardo anticipated. Shortly after the breakup, Gerardo witnessed a disturbing incident. While walking downtown, Gerardo noticed an older man secretly filming under a young girl's mini-skirt with his phone. Outraged, Gerardo took out his phone to record the scene. He then approached she, told her what was happening, and advised her to report the incident to the police. Gerardo chased the man for about 2 minutes, trying to get a clear shot of his face on camera. During the chase, Gerardo asked loudly if the man was enjoying taking photos of his sister's underwear without their consent. The man eventually jumped into a taxi and escaped. That night, Gerardo posted the video on his social media page, and it quickly went viral. Internet users identified the man as Luis Somano Delgado, a former Ministry of Finance employee. As a result, Gerardo became a national celebrity, giving daily interviews to newspapers and appearing on TV and radio shows. He condemned Delgado's actions and stated that he had no regrets about exposing him. However, Delgado's lawyers began working against Gerardo, accusing him of violating the law by distributing the video. They prepared a lawsuit against him, which left Gerardo surprised and confused. He couldn't understand why he was being judged for exposing his actions, rather than the man being held accountable for his behavior. Gerardo's last interview was on October 7th at a local radio station. Feeling confident and believing he had nothing to hide, he spoke openly. The following day, Gerardo had plans to meet his friend Oswald after work, but he suddenly canceled, citing an unexpected emergency. It was later revealed that he had received a message from Samadi, luring him to the park that evening under the pretext of another interview. Gerardo had no reason to suspect anything was amiss and trusted his former lover. After finishing work, he went to the agreed meeting point, but instead of journalists, two unknown men were waiting. They took his bag, assaulted him, stabbed him multiple times in the chest and stomach, and then fled. Before losing consciousness, Gerardo managed to call a friend and report the incident. The friend immediately alerted the police and medical services. Thanks to the swift response, Gerardo was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save his life for 42 days. He underwent numerous operations, but unfortunately, finale, they were unable to save him. Gerardo passed away on November 19 in the intensive care unit. Initially, multiple theories emerged about the crime. The first theory suggested it was a robbery murder. Gerardo was indeed attacked in a park at night, his bag was stolen, and he was stabbed with a knife, which made it appear to be a typical theft. However, just a few days before, Gerardo had released a sensational video that compromised a well-known former government official, leading to a second theory, that the murder was an act of revenge. The media openly speculated that the former government official may have hired hitmen to kill the young man who had damaged his reputation. The murder sparked intense debate in the press, with protesters demanding that the perpetrators be caught and brought to justice. The police explored various theories, searching for other potential enemies of Gerardo. For months, the investigation stalled. However, in May 2016, a breakthrough came when footage from a street surveillance camera was discovered. The video showed two men fleeing the scene where Gerardo was fatally attacked. These individuals immediately became the prime suspects, and the police worked to identify and apprehend them. The footage proved to be crucial evidence, and once it was made public, the case started to move forward. It was repeatedly shown on news programs, with viewers asked to take a close look as the individuals could be dangerous. Police created rough sketches of the suspects and described their physical characteristics. One of the suspects soon came forward, hoping that cooperating with the investigation would lead to a reduced sentence. The information provided by the cooperating suspect led investigators to several accomplices and the crime's organizers, Samadi and her daughter Christina. All individuals involved in the crime were eventually taken into custody. Those arrested included Ronald Archie, a cab driver who helped locate the perpetrators, Cesar Chavez, a laborer who acted as an intermediary, and Omar Costa, a young miner who directly participated in the attack and had been tracking the victim on the day of the incident. The investigation revealed the roles and connections of all parties involved through phone records and text messages. Samadi, who had meticulously planned the crime, had enlisted the help of her daughter Christina. Together, they recruited friends Ronald and Cesar to find hitmen to kill Gerardo, staging it to look like a botched robbery in a nighttime park. They were later joined by Omar, who was responsible for ensuring the victim went to the pre-arranged location. Samadi personally chose October 7th as the date for the massacre. On that day, she was in frequent contact with all parties involved, assigning roles and verifying that everyone adhered to the plan. Gerardo was attacked, stabbed multiple times, and robbed of his bag and jacket. These stolen items were later given to the police as evidence. The primary evidence against Samadi was a series of text messages detailing the murder plan and each participant's role. Samadi was so confident she wouldn't get caught that she didn't bother deleting the incriminating messages. Her motive for the crime was jealousy. She didn't want to share her lover with his wife. If she couldn't have him, no one would. She carefully planned the crime, involving her own daughter, who assisted her throughout. Samadi and her daughter were immediately arrested, with no possibility of bail due to the risk of them fleeing the country. Their accomplices were also detained, except for Omar, the youngest participant, who was handed over to juvenile authorities. The investigation spanned a year and a half, concluding in December 2017 when the trial of all parties involved in the criminal conspiracy commenced. It was revealed that Samadi had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior arrest for forging documents to obtain state benefits, for which she received only a fine. New information also emerged about Miguel Angel Perez, ex-husband of Samadi. It was discovered that Samadi had given their child Perez's surname without his consent. She then successfully petitioned the court to order him to pay child support, which he did for over 3 years. However, it was later uncovered that the entire process had been fraudulent. As a result, Samadi was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a substantial fine. During the trial, Gerardo's wife testified that she had been aware of his affair with Samadi. She stated that Samadi had threatened Gerardo with death, but he had not taken these threats seriously. The primary motive behind the crime, as previously stated, was Samadi's jealousy and wounded pride, stemming from her inability to accept that her younger lover had chosen to remain with his wife. Thanks to phone records, it was discovered that the mother and daughter had planned the crime together. Additionally, after the release of the CCTV footage showing the killers, Christine had a nervous breakdown. She called her mother, sobbing, and was close to going to the police to confess. However, her mother calmed her down, assuring her that the investigation would not lead to them. The verdict was announced on January 23, 2018. According to the court's decision, Samadi was sentenced to 30 years in prison, while Christina, Ronald, and Caesar each received 25-year prison sentences. One of the killers was sent to a juvenile detention center, and the other had not been found at the time. Omar, who had been stalking the victim, was acquitted. The victim's family was awarded $140,000 in compensation for their loss. After the verdict, the family expressed gratitude to the court for the fair punishment of Gerardo's killers. However, it soon became known that Samadi and Christina's lawyers had filed an appeal to reduce their sentences. As a result, each participant's sentence was reduced by 5 years. Samadi is currently serving her 25-year sentence in a Costa Rican women's prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Banaz Mahmoud. Banaz Mahmoud was born on December 16, 1985 in Iraq. She comes from an Iraqi Kurdish family with strong religious traditions. Her parents, Mahmoud Babakar Mahmoud and his wife, had 6 children, 1 son, Bahman, and 5 daughters, Baza, Beel, Han, Jaban, and Banaz. They lived in a rural tribal area in Iraqi Kurdistan, adhering to traditional values, especially regarding women's roles. In 1995, when Banaz was 10 years old, her family moved to the UK. However, this change in location did not alter their deeply held religious and traditional views. Despite being in a more liberal European country, the family continued to reject modern opinion and lived within their tight-knit religious community. At 17, Banaz was forced into a marriage with a man 10 years her senior, who had recently arrived from Iraq. He did not speak English and lacked basic literacy skills. Banaz having met her future husband only 3 times before the wedding. Banaz, described as a girl with brown eyes, long dark hair, and a kind smile, followed tradition and moved into her new husband's home, despite him being a stranger to her. From the start, Banaz suffered physical and emotional abuse at the hands of her husband. Despite having lived in the UK and being aware of her rights, she was trapped in a cycle of violence. She tried to leave her husband multiple times, but her family forced her to return, as it was considered a disgrace for the entire Mahmoud family. With no support from her relatives, Banaz turned to the police twice, but they failed to take action, leaving her vulnerable to further abuse. In July 2005, after 2 years of marriage, Banaz finally escaped her husband's house and returned to her parents' home. After leaving her husband, Banaz felt a sense of freedom. She met Rameth Soleimani, and they fell deeply in love. However, they had to keep their relationship a secret. They would only communicate twice a day, exchanging messages in the morning and evening. Rameth was unlike the men surrounding Banaz, as he was calm, wise, and courteous. He treated she with great respect and kindness, instantly winning her heart. Before long, they began envisioning a future together, discussing wedding plans and a happy family life. They even chose names for their potential children. These joyful dreams brought Banaz happiness and gave her the strength to cope with the hatred and aggression from her family. In early October 2005, Banaz was walking down the street when she noticed a car following her. She recognized the people inside as Kurdish migrants sent by her father. Knowing her family's history, Banaz became terrified for her safety. On October 10, 2005, Banaz visited the police station again. During a 2-hour conversation, she shared detailed information about her life with her husband, including the physical abuse she suffered, her family's resentment, and the recent surveillance. She told the police that her husband had repeatedly beaten her, and during one incident, he nearly knocked out her tooth because she dared to call him by his first name in public. Banaz had previously informed the police that she feared for her life, but her concerns were ignored. The police failed to investigate her claims, neglecting to interview her family and husband to verify the accuracy of the information. She was told to contact them again if she felt threatened. Banaz and her boyfriend, Rameth, secretly met for about 2 months without being detected. However, in early December 2005, they were spotted by members of her family near a London subway station. This information was immediately reported to her father. That evening, her male relatives gathered at the family home, where they discussed her actions and deemed them unacceptable. Her uncle, Ari Mahmoud, declared that Banaz should be killed to restore the family's honor. Banaz overheard this conversation. Following this, Banaz went to the police again and explained that she had been under surveillance for months. She also told them that her family intended to kill her. She provided a list of 5 family members who were involved in the plot, but the police did not take her seriously. A serious mistake was made, which led to Banaz's disappearance. To uncover her fate, investigators must untangle a complicated network of lies, violence, and disregard for the truth. 2 weeks later, Banaz's father deceives her into visiting a relative's house, promising to discuss her divorce. Upon arrival, he forces her to drink brandy and leaves her alone in a room with the TV on. As she turns around, she sees her father putting on rubber gloves and reaching for a rope. Realizing her life is in danger, Banaz rushes to the front door, but it's locked. To escape, she breaks a window, cutting her hands on the shards. Banaz manages to reach a nearby cafe, where she collapses. Paramedics arrive and take her to the hospital, where the police are called. When Banaz regains consciousness, she contacts Rameth and asks him to come. After being discharged from the hospital, Banaz moves in with Rameth Soleimani. They celebrate the start of 2006 together and are happy. However, by mid-January, the Mahmoud family begins to pressure Banaz to return home, supposedly to mend their relationship and discuss her marriage to Rameth. Banaz trusted her parents and agreed to return to her father's house, believing her mother would protect her if her father became violent. To be safe, Banaz went to the police station again and gave a full statement, including the names of people she thought might harm her. Despite her fears, she returned to her family home. On January 22, 2006, Rameth was attacked by 3 men in the street who tried to force him into a car. He managed to fight back and reported the incident to the police. 2 days later, Rameth and Banaz were due to give a statement at the police station, but Banaz failed to appear. Rameth attempted to reach Banaz Mahmoud, but lost contact with her after she vanished upon returning to her family's residence. Rameth, who had been in constant touch with Banaz, grew increasingly worried and filed a missing persons report with the police. After numerous appeals, the police finally took action. The disappearance of Banaz Mahmut sparked an investigation led by the Homicide and Serious Crime Directorate, with Chief Inspector Caroline Good at the helm. Initially, it was suspected that Banaz was being held captive in a house within the community. To locate her, Inspector Good organized an extensive search linked to the Mahmut family. Banaz's father, uncle, and ex-husband were brought in for questioning as suspects. The police also began searching for 3 other men listed by Banaz in December 2005, Omar Hussein, Muhammad Ali, and Mohammed Hama, all of whom were her cousins. However, when the police searched the neighborhood and tried to question her family members, and the family refused to cooperate with the investigation into her disappearance. Police found no photos of Banaz at her family's home, and her family's complete lack of concern shocked officers. Caroline Good then focused on 30 individuals, all of whom were arrested and questioned. During the investigation, over 20 vehicles and 300 cell phones were seized from those involved. Every person questioned attempted to hinder the investigation, providing conflicting accounts of Banaz's whereabouts. Some claimed to have seen her after she went missing, while others, including her mother, refused to cooperate with the police. Some even suggested she was in hiding. Realizing that no one would cooperate voluntarily, Caroline Good obtained permission to bug the cells of those arrested. At that point, Banaz's father, her uncle, and Mohammed Hama remained in police custody. 2 other men under investigation had managed to escape to Iraq. The detectives were horrified when they received the initial wiretap results. Not only did the 3 arrested men show no remorse, but they also took pleasure in recounting the details of Banaz's death. Their conversations revealed that on January 23, the Mahmut family intentionally left their home, allowing Omar Hussein and Hama to enter. Once inside, they attacked Banaz, subjecting her to a 2-hour ordeal of beatings and violence. As the torture came to an end, Hama wrapped a cord around Banaz's neck and strangled her. When recalling the final moments of Banaz's life, Hama couldn't contain his laughter. However, it was Mohammed Hama's admission of being present when Rameth was threatened that became the turning point in the case. While Hama was being held in a cell awaiting trial, his phone conversations were secretly recorded. Caroline Good listened to these recordings with growing horror as the suspect proudly described the gruesome details of the murder. In the recordings, Hama provided a detailed account of what they did to Banaz. Despite being terrified and vomiting, Banaz remained silent. Hama then wrapped the rope around her neck 3 times, pulling it so tight that it dug into her skin. As he continued to speak with excitement, he placed his feet on her back and pulled and tugged on the rope. Banaz clung to life until her last breath. It took the perpetrators over 30 minutes to kill Banaz. The brutality of the crime was too much for Caroline Good and the detectives, and they couldn't hold back their tears. Banaz's cousin, Dana Amin, 30, was present in the house and helped the perpetrator put Banaz's body in a suitcase. Muhammad Ali then dragged the suitcase out of the house to a waiting car nearby. Hama revealed that a police car drove by, but the officers didn't notice the suitcase, which had hair and an elbow protruding from it. The very people meant to protect Banaz were involved in plotting her murder. They strangled her with a shoelace, stuffed her body into a suitcase, and took it outside of London. Snippets of conversation mentioned a derelict house with a garden in Birmingham. Caroline Good used the information gathered and matched it with the movement data from the arrested suspects' phones to identify the search area. Due to the vastness of the area, the search could have taken a long time. During a conversation with the suspects, one of them suddenly turned to the other and asked if they had put the freezer back where it originally was. This sparked an idea for Caroline Good, now knew what to look for. A police helicopter was deployed to scan the area and spotted a house with a backyard filled with trash, including a white oblong object resembling a freezer that stood out among the black garbage bags. Upon closer inspection of the suspicious house, the officers' suspicions were confirmed. The police officers began digging, but as the hole reached shoulder depth, they were on the verge of giving up, all except Caroline Good. She recalled the words of Mohammed Hama, who had boasted to relatives that he had buried the victim so deep that she would only be found with the help of an informant. Caroline Good convinced the team to extend the search for another day. On the evening of April 28, 2006, their persistence paid off, and the suitcase was finally found. Unfortunately, Banaz's remains were in extremely poor condition, making it necessary to rely on dental records and DNA samples for identification. Her body was discovered folded into a fetal position, hidden in a suitcase and buried beneath a freezer in the garden of a Birmingham house. On May 1, 2006, the suspects were formally charged with the crime. However, they displayed no remorse, convinced that their actions were justified. Mohammed Hama even claimed that the case would not go to trial, as he believed he was simply carrying out an act of retaliation. Meanwhile, Caroline Good faced renewed opposition from the Kurdish diaspora community. Following the discovery of Banaz's remains, numerous individuals came forward to provide alibis for the suspects, claiming that they were in public on the day of the alleged and therefore could not have committed the crime. Approximately 50 individuals were involved or connected to Banaz's death in various capacities. Reflecting on the events, Caroline Good recalled feeling intense anger, disgust, and contempt for the men involved. She noted that 50 men had participated in the murder of one woman, and they took pride in their actions, which they saw as a demonstration of their masculinity. In March 2007, the trial against Mahmoud Babakar Mahmoud, Ari Mahmoud, and Mohammed Hamad began at London Central Criminal Court. Prosecutor Victor Temple described the crime as a cold-blooded and heartless execution that was orchestrated by the victim's father and uncle. In June 2007, a jury delivered finding all three defendants guilty of the charges and ineligible for leniency. The sentences handed down were severe. The father received a life sentence with a minimum of 20 years, the uncle was given life with a 23-year minimum, and cousin Mohammed Hama also received a life sentence with a minimum term of 17 years. Judge Brian Barker was scathing in his delivery of the verdict, stating, "You decided that your so-called family honor needed to be restored, which meant she had to die and her memory erased. This is a heinous and heartless crime. What kind of honor is it when a father prioritizes his social status over the life of his own child?" A mere 4 months after the trio's conviction, London police were informed that Muhammad Ali had been arrested in Iraq for a crime committed against a young boy. Muhammad Ali had taken his own life. Omar Hussein, the last of the 5 perpetrators, had been hiding in rural Iraq, attempting to avoid public detection. However, in December 2009, he was shot in the leg during an altercation with one of his brothers and required medical attention. Upon arriving at the hospital, police were notified and subsequently arrested him. Initially, Omar Hussein denied being in London in 2005, thereby claiming innocence in Banaz's death. But UK Social Security records revealed that he had been receiving refugee benefits during that time, contradicting his statement. The court ultimately sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. Dana Amin was given an 8 years prison sentence for his role in disposing of Banaz Mahmoud's body and hindering the investigation. A recorded interview with Banaz at a police station implicated her family in the crime. Banaz had previously handed in a letter to a police station in South London, naming individuals who threatened to kill her and her boyfriend Rameth. The individuals named in the letter were from Banaz's family and the wider Iraqi Kurdish community. They were angry about her decision to divorce her husband, who treated her poorly. Despite several attempts to leave him, Banaz returned due to family pressure. The police failed to respond properly to Banaz's situation, which ultimately resulted in her death. However, this case prompted significant changes in how honor-related cases are handled. An inquiry into police misconduct was launched after Banaz's death, and an independent commission investigated 9 police officers for their inadequate response to her allegations. 7 officers received reprimands, and 2 were dismissed. It is essential to recognize the tireless efforts of Caroline Good and her team, who successfully located Banaz's body, secured the conviction of her father and uncle, and brought the escaped perpetrators back from Iraq. Banaz was laid to rest at the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery in Morden. A memorial service was held in her honor on June 26, 2007, at the MN Auditorium, followed by the installation of a granite memorial headstone at her gravesite. The memorial was attended by a small group of people, including Rahmat Soleimani, Caroline Good, and Banaz's 2 sisters. Notably, Banaz's family did not attend either service. Rahmat Soleimani, who had been living in the UK under witness protection, was profoundly affected by Banaz's death. He penned a heartfelt letter expressing his love and grief, describing Banaz as the love of his life and his entire world. Unfortunately, his pain and suffering continued, and in May 2016, 10 years after the tragedy, he took his own life. This was his 3rd attempt to end his life, a devastating consequence of the trauma he had endured. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Birbeck. Lindsay was born in Blackburn, Lancashire, northwest England. She and her husband, Tim Birbeck, separated in July 2018, but they continued living together until March 2019. At that time, Lindsay moved to a new home on Burnley Road in Hanko. As a mother, Lindsay cared for her 2 adult children, Divin, 20, and Sarah, 17. Professionally, she worked as a teacher's aide at Atton Hill Elementary School in Burnley. She enjoyed being around children and was known for her artistic talent. Lindsay would often go the extra mile to create impressive props for school productions. On August 12, Lindsay went for a walk in the wooded area of Coppice, near her Hanko home. However, when her daughters Sarah and Sarah's boyfriend Brandon arrived at the house for a scheduled tea party, Lindsay was nowhere to be found. This was unusual, as Lindsay was not one to forget appointments. Sarah tried calling Lindsay multiple times, but there was no answer. She sent Lindsay a text message saying, "Where are you? We sat outside for an hour and called 6 times." When Lindsay didn't respond, Sarah sent another message with a series of question marks, but still received no reply. After waiting for an hour outside Lindsay's house, Sarah called her father, Tim Birbeck, since her mother was not home and not answering her phone. Tim took Sarah and her brother Brandon to his house around midnight. Later, Sarah and Tim went back to Lindsay's house with a spare set of keys, but Lindsay was nowhere to be found. The house looked undisturbed, and there were no signs of anything out of the ordinary or a note explaining Lindsay's whereabouts. At 12:11 a.m. on August 13, Tim contacted the police to report Lindsay missing, stating, "Lindsay seems to be missing. We can't find her." Lindsay's disappearance shocked the community, prompting a massive search effort. Hundreds of people, including families with strollers and teenagers, joined the search, even if they didn't know Lindsay personally. After days of searching, posting on social media, and putting up posters, the community gathered at a local spot called Coppice for 2 days, hoping to find a clue to help solve the mystery of Lindsay's disappearance. The search continued non-stop despite the challenges. Thousands of posters with Lindsay's picture were distributed throughout the neighborhood. A Facebook group to aid the search gained 10,000 members. Posters soon appeared everywhere, including lamp posts, storefronts, and traffic lights, asking for help in finding Lindsay. Police launched a thorough investigation into Lindsay's disappearance, conducting extensive searches around her house and the surrounding countryside. A team of specialists, including police officers, dog handlers, firefighters, and mountain rescue volunteers scoured the area. They also deployed drones and helicopters to cover a wide range, including popular walking and running routes. For days after Lindsay went missing, police released CCTV footage showing her last seen walking along Burnley Road towards Coppice at 4:10 p.m. She was wearing a distinctive purple jacket, black leggings, and dark sneakers with white soles. As a week passed since her disappearance, hopes of finding Lindsay alive began to dwindle. Despite the efforts of the police, her whereabouts remained a mystery. However, the police emphasized that there was no evidence to suggest she was the victim of a crime, leaving a glimmer of hope that she might still be found alive. That evening, hundreds of local residents joined forces for the first mass public search of Coppice, following a rallying call on social media. A local resident's dog ran into the woods at Errington Cemetery, prompting its owner to follow. The dog didn't respond to its owner's calls, instead hiding its head in the bushes and sniffing at something. As the owner approached, they felt something soft underfoot, which frightened them. A terrible smell and swarming flies surrounded a plastic bag, with what appeared to be a foot visible. On August 24th, Lindsay Bobek's body was discovered 12 days after her disappearance. Her naked body was buried in the cemetery, wrapped in 2 clear plastic bags and mixed with earth and grass, in a shallow grave. With this discovery, the search for Lindsay Bobek was concluded, and a murder investigation officially began. Pathologist Dr. Naomi Carter conducted an autopsy and found that the cause of death was a broken neck, likely caused by a forceful blow from a foot or knee. The trauma was so severe that the entire larynx was crushed. Additionally, it appeared that someone had attempted to cut off the right leg after death, possibly using a saw, leaving a large laceration that cut down to the bone. Due to the poor condition of the body, Dr. Carter had difficulty determining the full extent of the injuries. While she couldn't rule out the possibility of sexual activity on the day of the disappearance, the level of decomposition made it impossible to confirm. Before the body was found, the area had been searched by police and community volunteers for several days, but nothing was discovered. A blue wheelie garbage can was spotted in nearby bushes, but its significance was not yet realized at that stage of the investigation. Volunteers searched the cemetery on August 20th at 9 p.m. and found a dumpster with a dark stain that they suspected might be blood. They took pictures and called the police, who arrived to inspect the dumpster. However, the police officers thought the dark stain was just dirt and noted that the dumpster looked new. With no evidence linking it to Lindsay's disappearance, they left it in place. Other clues were found in the cemetery but weren't immediately considered significant. Christine Alderson, a local resident, discovered a bloody cloth on the grass on August 18th while walking her dogs. She believed the blood was fresh but thought it might belong to a homeless man who often visited the area. Judith Bibby, another dog walker, reported seeing what was likely Lindsay's jacket hanging on a barbed wire fence near the Cardiel Hill Trail. On August 25th, investigators returned to the crime scene and discovered a yellow-handled saw and a pair of green heavy-duty gloves near Lindsay's grave. The gloves had blood on them and were sent for forensic testing. The test results showed that the gloves contained the perpetrator's DNA on the inside and Lindsay's DNA on the outside of the left glove. Additionally, investigators found a pair of Lindsay's Skechers sneakers in a blue plastic bag in the cemetery. The shoes had been cut along the sole. Further examination revealed that Lindsay's body was wrapped in plastic sheeting, with foliage and grass that didn't match the cemetery grounds between her body and the sheeting. This led investigators to believe that Lindsay's body had been moved from another location. The discovery of the moved body led detectives to recall a blue trash can that had caught the attention of volunteers. Upon reviewing CCTV footage, police officers made a surprising discovery that left the investigation team perplexed. Several images showed a young man pulling a blue wheelie garbage can in the Burley Road area over the course of a few days. A CCTV camera caught the same individual returning to the cemetery on 4 separate occasions. This footage helped identify a suspect. A video of the young man carrying a trash can down the street, possibly containing Lindsay's body, gained widespread attention. The video was broadcast on the news with a request for help identifying the individual, which proved successful. The individual in the video was identified as Rocky Marciano Rocky, a local resident who lived with his parents and 5 siblings on Winnie Hill Road in Arrington. The Rocky family had resided in this home for approximately 3 decades. Rocky struggled with a range of mental health issues, including autism, attention deficit disorder, and hyperactivity, which he had experienced since childhood. Additionally, his low IQ presented challenges with learning and communication. Rocky attended an alternative school in Barnoldswick several days a week, where teachers described him as a quiet and nonverbal student. In 2015, a psychologist evaluated Rocky and found he had difficulty understanding his emotions and how they related to events. A 2016 report noted that Rocky was unresponsive to strangers and required constant supervision. According to Timothy Bradley, a teacher at his school, Rocky showed little interest in academics, preferring practical activities. He rarely engaged in conversations, even about topics that interested him. Rocky was physically strong and enjoyed activities like going to the gym, caring for chickens, and playing Xbox. Rocky often seemed detached from reality and unaware of his actions. His attack on Lindsay Bubeck appeared to be motivated by a desire to kill a woman, and she happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The murder was a random act committed by a stranger. On August 12, 2020, 1 year after the crime, Rocky Marciano Rocky went on trial. After an 8-day retrial and 4 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered a unanimous guilty verdict. Rocky, 17, showed no reaction via video link from Her Majesty's Prison, Wetherby. His parents, present in court, also remained expressionless. Rocky had pleaded guilty to aiding in the disposal of Lindsay's body but denied any role in her death. He claimed a male stranger approached him and offered a fee to help bury she. In a prepared statement, Rocky admitted to moving the garbage can and burying the body, but maintained he had no involvement in Lindsay's death. However, evidence collected from his home in Arrington, including identical plastic bags found at Lindsay's grave and a tracksuit matching the one he wore in surveillance footage from August 12, 16, and 17, contradicted his claims. Defense attorney Mark Van Hull stated to the jurors that although Rocky committed a reprehensible act by burying her body in the cemetery, he maintains that Rocky was not responsible for her death, despite the substantial evidence against him. The judge sentenced Rocky to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. He will be eligible for release only when the parole board determines he is no longer a danger to society. The judge described the attack as swift and brutal, and stated that Rocky clearly intended to kill a woman who was walking in the area just minutes before Lindsay's murder. Security footage shows that Rocky Price made 2 return visits to the location where Lindsay was killed on the evening of August 12. At 6:55 p.m., he was captured on CCTV carrying a black backpack, likely containing a saw to dismember the victim's body. At 8:28 p.m., he was seen at the same location, where he would eventually dispose of the body. With no visible signs of panic or distress, Rocky Price carried out a calculated plan to dispose of Lindsay's body. He carefully placed it in a blue trash can, wrapping it in 2 plastic bags, before burying it in a shallow grave at Arrington Cemetery. The fact that he stalked another woman before killing Lindsay Bubeck indicates that his crime was premeditated, rather than a spontaneous loss of control. Lindsay's funeral took place at St. Margaret's Church in Hapton on September 20th. Over 200 people attended the service, which was briefly interrupted by police stopping traffic on Manchester Road to allow Lindsay's coffin, adorned with flowers, to be carried into the church. The scene was filled with dozens of bouquets from friends, family, and strangers who were moved by Lindsay's story. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabriela Alcano. Gabriela Alcano was born on May 17, 2001, in Santiago, the capital city of Chile. She was the only child of Federico Alino and Carolina Donosa Campos, and the first grandchild in a large, close-knit family. Her paternal uncle, Rodrigo, who served as her godfather, and her grandfather, Carlos, both adored her deeply, with Carlos regarding her as the central figure in his life. Gabriela grew up in a loving and supportive environment, despite her family's modest means. Her parents, though not wealthy, worked hard to provide her with a good education and upbringing. When Gabriela was 5, her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother, who dedicated herself to raising her. Her father, however, remarried and had 2 younger sons, but he continued to support Gabriela and her mother financially and remained involved in her life. Gabriela was a sweet and friendly child who was a bit shy but made friends easily. Her gentle nature and lovely appearance earned her admiration from those around her. She excelled academically, enjoyed music, dance, and art, and her parents encouraged her talents. Gabriela cherished her relationships with her younger half-brothers, spending quality time with them at her father's nearby home during weekends and holidays. Overall, Gabriela's childhood was a happy and carefree time, filled with love and support from her family. Gabriela's first love was at the age of 15. She fell for Fabian Chasis Aravan, a fellow student who was a year older. At first, their relationship was innocent and sweet. They would walk together, share ice cream, and steal kisses. Fabian came from a good family with well-respected parents who valued education and raised him to be a good person. However, Fabian was a quiet and private person who struggled with social interactions. He would avoid eye contact and turn away from others, leading many to think he was just shy. Gabriela's father met Fabian and thought he was a calm, dependable, and responsible young man. He had a serious talk with Fabian, asking him to take care of Gabriela, and Fabian promised to do so. Initially, Fabian made an effort to be attentive and caring. However, as time passed, a different side of Fabian emerged. He became controlling and cruel, revealing a darker aspect of his personality. Fabian's controlling behavior dominated the relationship. He was intensely jealous and dictated who Gabriela could and couldn't interact with. He monitored her phone activity, insisting on instant responses to his calls and messages, regardless of the time. If she failed to comply, he would throw tantrums, displaying childish and abusive behavior. During the first 6 months of their relationship, Gabriela attempted to downplay Fabian's frequent outbursts of anger and jealousy, believing they would eventually subside. Blinded by her love for him, she tried to meet all his demands and held on to the hope that he would revert to the caring and gentle person she initially fell in love with. Fabian's behavior became increasingly irritable, volatile, and aggressive. He emotionally drained Gabriela, progressing from verbal abuse to physical mistreatment. He would slap her, pull her hair, or grab her hands, often leaving no visible marks. However, bruises would occasionally appear on her wrists and shoulders, evidence of Fabian's rough handling. Gabriela tried to hide her situation, but her loved ones noticed her depressed state and frequent tears. She was no longer her usual cheerful and outgoing self, instead withdrawing from friends and avoiding contact with people Fabian had forbidden her from seeing. Gabriela repeatedly tried to end her relationship with Fabian, but he would not let her go. Despite her efforts to break free, he would pressure her into getting back together. This cycle of breaking up and reuniting continued for over a year, marked by Fabian's stalking, threats, and harassment. In 2017, Fabian got into trouble for physically attacking a classmate outside of school. Although the details of the incident were unclear, he was accused of mistreatment and assault, which could have led to jail time. However, the case was settled out of court, and Fabian was expelled from school. He was forced to complete his education through homeschooling. When Gabriella finally decided to end the relationship for good, Fabian became angry and desperate. He apologized and promised to change, begging her to take him back. However, when she refused, he began to stalk and harass her. He would show up at her school or home, even attempting to climb into her room through the window. He bombarded her with dozens of calls, texts, voice messages, and social media messages, trying to intimidate her into resuming their relationship. Gabriella was determined to end the relationship, despite Fabian's erratic behavior. His messages veered wildly from apologetic to threatening, but she remained resolute. However, Fabian's actions were unpredictable and frightening. He would often vanish for weeks, giving Gabriella a glimmer of hope that he had moved on, only to reappear and resume his harassment. Fabian's behavior was relentless and intrusive. He would follow Gabriella everywhere, showing up unexpectedly and causing public scenes. His outbursts were loud and intimidating, leaving Gabriella feeling anxious and fearful. As a result, she became reluctant to be alone, always seeking the company of friends or family after school. She would often meet her mother at work and travel home with her, or ask her father or uncle to accompany her on trips. This constant vigilance took a toll on Gabriella, leaving her exhausted and drained over several months. A devastating series of events began to unfold for the Elcano family when a burglar broke into the home of Federico's second wife, taking her life in a tragic turn of events. At the time, the children were at school and Federico was at work, leaving her alone and vulnerable. Fortunately, the perpetrator, a neighbor with a prior conviction, was apprehended immediately. Gabriella and her mother rallied around Federico, offering emotional support and helping him care for the children during this difficult time. Although Gabriella's thoughts were temporarily diverted from Fabian, who had gone missing around the same time, she remained focused on her own goals. She was busy preparing for entrance exams, hoping to secure a spot at one of Santiago's most prestigious universities, where she aspired to study journalism or advertising. However, this tragedy was only the beginning of a series of heartbreaking events that would soon befall the Elcano family. In May 2018, Fabian suddenly re-emerged, beginning a campaign of obsessive stalking that made Gabriella feel unsafe in all aspects of her life. He was able to access her property by climbing over the fence and even showed up at places she regularly visited, such as the supermarket and the mall. By early June, Gabriella was so alarmed by his behavior that she sent screenshots of her disturbing messages with Fabian to her two closest friends, including audio recordings where he explicitly threatened her and demanded they restart their relationship. Gabriella was secretly living in fear for her own safety and that of her loved ones, but she chose not to share her concerns with her family to avoid causing them unnecessary worry. On June 10, 2018, the Elcano family came together to celebrate a milestone birthday, Carlos's 80th. Tragically, this joyful gathering would turn out to be the last day of life for Gabriella and her mother, Carolina. The evening had begun on a happy note, with the house filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of a big family meal. As they celebrated Carlos's special day, everyone wished him good health and many more years to come. Gabriella played with her younger brothers and her uncle Rodrigo's children, but despite the festive atmosphere, she seemed somewhat preoccupied and distant. Her uncle noticed her unease and decided to approach her, asking if everything was okay and if something was troubling her. Gabriella gave a sad smile and shrugged, but didn't explain why she was nervous. Her uncle chose not to pry, thinking she would open up when she was ready. However, he later regretted not pressing her for more information. After the party, Federico drove his ex-wife and daughter home. He kissed Gabriella on the forehead, told her he loved her, and reassured her that she could always count on him for support. He then returned home with his younger children. Tragically, this was the last time he saw his eldest daughter and first wife alive. In the early hours of June 11th, a horrific crime took place. Fabian, armed with a hunting knife, climbed over the fence of his ex-girlfriend's house. He planned to sneak into Gabriella's bedroom through the window and attack her. However, just as he was about to enter, the lights turned on and the back door creaked open. Carolina, who had been unable to sleep, had gotten up to investigate the noise. Fabian pounced on her, pushing her back inside, and began stabbing her repeatedly. Fabian brutally stabbed his Carolina 36 times, with most of the wounds inflicted on her chest, neck, and head. This attack was fatal and left her with no chance of survival. Carolina only managed to scream a couple of times before falling silent. The noise from the attack woke up Gabriella, who rushed downstairs to see what was happening. As she went down, she saw Fabian, covered in blood and clearly enraged. He caught hold of her and dragged her down. Gabriella was desperately trying to call the emergency services with her phone, but she couldn't make the call. In a horrific act, Fabian attacked Carolina and stabbed her once in the chest, piercing her heart and instantly killing her. He then moved her body to the kitchen. After the murder, Fabian tried to cover his tracks by wiping away his fingerprints and cleaning the bloody footprints. He also washed himself and the knife in the bathroom. After cleaning up, Fabian left the house quietly around 5:30 a.m. without being noticed by the neighbors. Following the event, Federico appeared unaffected. However, concerns grew when Carolina, typically a reliable and communicative colleague, missed work for 2 consecutive days without answering her phone. Her employer contacted Federico, asking him to find out what had happened to Carolina. When questioned, Federico was surprised and claimed to have called Carolina, but she was unreachable, as was Gabriella, whose phone was off. Next, Federico phoned his brother, Rodrigo, but Rodrigo stated that he had neither seen nor heard from the missing individuals since their friend's birthday. Following the phone call, Federico decided to pay a visit to Carolina's home. The property appeared uninhabited. Nonetheless, Carolina's vehicle remained in the garage. Without forcibly entering, despite possessing a spare key, Federico merely checked on the status of the property. Federico called the police and asked them to check the house, but he didn't enter himself because he was afraid of what he might find. The police officers were puzzled by this, especially since he had a key. When they finally entered the house at 11 a.m., they found the lifeless bodies of Carolina and Gabriella on the kitchen floor, surrounded by pools of blood. Despite the obvious fact that the women had been dead for over a day, Federico was overcome with grief and irrationally demanded that the police call an ambulance to save them. The police had to calm Federico down, but his behavior raised suspicions, and they took him outside to a police car for questioning. When he tried to leave the car and found the door locked, he became agitated and demanded to know why. It was then that he realized he was the main suspect in the double homicide. Federico was shocked and devastated by this turn of events, unable to comprehend how he could be suspected of killing his own daughter. Rodrigo arrived shortly after and was equally shocked to learn that his brother had not been released. He was also struggling to come to terms with the investigation revealed that Gabriella's friends reported that she was being stalked by her ex-boyfriend, Fabian. Screenshots of his threatening messages and voice recordings, which included a disturbing phrase, "It's easier to take her life than to let her go," were also obtained. This came as a shock to Federico, Gabriella's father, who recalled that Fabian seemed pleasant when they first met, despite his daughter's failed attempts to break up with him. The contrast between the heinous crime and the normalcy of Fabian's daily life, where he spent time with family and friends and posted light-hearted photos on social media, made his crime all the more inconceivable. After being taken into custody, Fabian responded to allegations with pretended astonishment and anguish, falsely claiming his innocence and feigning affection for Gabriella. Fabian had gotten rid of the object used to commit the murder and thrown away some clothes with blood on them. However, there were still small drops of blood on his shoes, and footprints matching his shoes were found at the scene of the crime. Additionally, 4 of Gabriella's classmates said they heard Fabian threaten her, saying it would be easier to kill her than let her go. Because of the evidence and what the witnesses said, Fabian admitted to the crime, but tried to make himself look like a lover who was deeply hurt. The defendant claimed that his intention was not to harm Gabriella, but rather to have a conversation with her. However, the situation escalated, and he ultimately treated her mother as an unwanted witness. He struggled to provide a reasonable explanation for bringing a hunting knife to the encounter, which was supposedly meant to be a conversation. Following the autopsy and other necessary examinations, the victims' bodies were released to their family for burial. A large crowd gathered at the funeral to pay their respects to the deceased and offer condolences to their loved ones. Gabriella was laid to rest in a white dress she had always wanted to wear but never had the chance to. Coralina was buried in a closed casket due to the severe mutilation of her face. Fabian's family hired a skilled lawyer who developed a strong defense strategy, aiming to secure a minimal sentence for his client. During the initial court hearings, the lawyer highlighted Fabian's young age and clean record, pointing out that the attack on his classmate had been resolved outside of court. However, the victim's family pushed for a more severe charge of femicide, which was rejected by the prosecution due to the specific requirements of Chile's law. Since Fabian and the victim were not in a romantic relationship at the time of the crime, the case did not meet the criteria for femicide. The lawyer also argued that Fabian had acted on impulse and was in a state of distress when he committed the crime. As a result, Fabian faced a potential 15-year sentence for the double homicide and assault charges. The victim's family, understandably, demanded the maximum punishment for Fabian. After the initial hearings, the judge gave both the prosecution and defense 6 months to gather evidence. Fabian's lawyer requested his release pending trial, but the judge denied this request, keeping Fabian in custody. Gabriella's father was furious. He lost 2 loved ones to violent deaths. Now, the person responsible for the murders of his ex-wife and daughter might receive a lenient sentence. The defense lawyer tried to blame the victims, and the authorities seemed willing to accept this excuse. In response, Gabriella's father and uncle, along with women's rights groups, proposed Gabriella's Law. This law would broaden the definition of femicide to include intimate partner violence, regardless of whether they was married or cohabiting. The National Office for Women and Gender Equality soon joined the cause, actively pushing for the law. Although the bill faced opposition due to concerns that it could lead to new charges and stricter penalties for perpetrators already in prison, feminist groups nationwide rallied behind the Alino family. They organized marches and demonstrations in support of Gabriella's Law. In August 2019, a year and 3 months after the tragic murders, significant changes were made to Chile's femicide law. Known as Gabriella's Law, these amendments aimed to strengthen the country's response to violence against women. The law now defines femicide as any act of violence, injury, or murder committed against a woman due to hatred based on her gender, regardless of the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. Additionally, the law considers it an aggravating circumstance if the victim is a minor or has health issues. In April 2022, Fabian Ceres went on trial for attacking his ex-girlfriend and her mother 4 years earlier. Thanks to Gabriella's Law, the defense had limited options. Fabian was charged with femicide under aggravating circumstances because one of the victims was a minor, as well as with double homicide and assault. On April 20th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was delivered, Federico and Rodrigo spoke to the court, expressing their gratitude to the judges for their fair decision. They acknowledged that no punishment could restore the life of their loved ones, Carolina and Gabriella, but emphasized that a life sentence for the perpetrator would serve as a safeguard, protecting other women from suffering a similar tragic fate. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Brianna Marie Schneller. Brianna Marie Schneller was an 18-year-old with a vibrant personality who loved Mexican food, music, dancing, and roller coasters. She was an exceptional student, and ranking as the top student at Everest High School in Washington, according to her parents, Craig and Lori Schneller. Brianna had a promising future ahead, with a trip to Tennessee planned for the summer and a notable achievement as the only student in Wisconsin to qualify for a national competition in professional and technical fields. Brianna's passion was to pursue a career in restaurant management and eventually start her own business in the food service industry. To gain experience and skills, she worked part-time at El Mezcal restaurant in Rib Mountain. Those who knew her, including friends, colleagues, and customers, described her as kind and responsive. Brianna's life was on the verge of two major events: her graduation and her wedding to her 22-year-old fiancé, Sebastian Ramirez. Brianna's parents initially disapproved of her relationship with Sebastian due to their age difference and concerns that she was growing up too quickly. However, after getting to know Sebastian better, they began to trust him and saw that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious plans for their future together. They eventually moved in together, sharing an apartment on 12th Avenue in WoW with Sebastian's 19-year-old younger brother, Hugo. To outsiders, it seemed like the three of them got along well and lived harmoniously, burning the envy of many for their close friendship. Sebastian and Hugo supported Brianna's interests and also worked with her at a local restaurant called El Tequila Salsa. It's likely that this is where Sebastian and Brianna first met. Despite their seemingly perfect life, tragedy struck on May 2, 2009. The day began like any other, with Sebastian waking up early and trying not to disturb Brianna, who was still sleeping peacefully beside him. It was a day off from school, and she had no reason to wake up early. Brianna woke up while her boyfriend was in the shower. They exchanged affectionate greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to rouse Hugo, who had returned home early that morning after a late-night party. Hugo was clearly hungover. After Sebastian left for work, which was just a short walk away, his younger brother followed suit. Brianna was left alone in the apartment. Later, Hugo was feeling unwell. His hangover was severe, and he was struggling to concentrate. He decided to take an early lunch break and headed home to rest. When he arrived at the apartment, everything seemed normal at first. However, as he entered his brother's room, he noticed that it was in disarray. Brianna was lying on the floor, unresponsive. Hugo rushed to her side and asked what was wrong, but she didn't answer. At first, he didn't notice the blood. Hugo discovered a horrific scene when he removed a towel covering a woman's face. Her severe injuries had left Hugo almost unrecognizable, and he was utterly shocked and overcome with grief at the sight of her. Despite his distress, he knew he had to act quickly and ran to his neighbor's apartment on the floor below for help. The neighbor, a woman, called emergency services at 1:30 p.m., who was too distraught to speak clearly. The emergency operator received the call and was told that she was the girlfriend of Sebastian. She was lying on the floor, severely injured with cuts all over her body and a badly disfigured face. The operator was informed that she showed no signs of life. Police and paramedics rushed to the apartment building after receiving a call. When they arrived, they found a crowded parking lot, but one person stood out, Hugo Ramirez. He approached the officers and led them to the apartment where the incident occurred. Inside, they found a disturbing scene. Brianna's body was severely injured, with deep stab wounds on her chest, neck, and wrist. Hugo was visibly shaken and could barely speak as he led officers to the apartment. He simply pointed to Brianna's body, and the officers took note of the scene. The officers asked Hugo to leave the room so that forensic specialists could begin their examination. The specialists observed that the blood on the floor had already started to dry, suggesting that Brianna's body had been there for some time. It was clear that she had tried to defend herself, as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the attacker had overpowered her, leaving behind a crime scene with a significant amount of evidence. The forensic team found several key pieces of evidence, including a bloody iron on the floor, which appeared to have been used to strike Brianna's face. The iron was broken, with pieces scattered nearby. 2 knives were found in the bathroom sink, one of which was missing its sharp tip. Blood was also found on the soap, suggesting that the attacker had washed their hands after the crime. However, the most notable piece of evidence was a bloodied shoe print on the carpet, which drew the investigators' attention. The investigation of the house uncovered many new details. Notably, there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim may have known her attacker or that the perpetrator had a way to enter the apartment without breaking in. Additionally, a large sum of money was found scattered throughout the apartment, consisting of bills ranging from $1 to $20. According to Hugo, this money was comprised of tips they had accumulated at work, which were carelessly left lying around. At first glance, it appeared that nothing was missing from the apartment, indicating that the attack was not motivated by robbery. This theory was further supported by the discovery of a broken knife tip in the victim's body. The fact that the knife broke during the attack indicates that the perpetrator applied considerable force. It's crucial to grasp what may have motivated someone to hold such intense feelings of anger and aggression against she. Uncovering the cause of this brutal and unprecedented attack is crucial in shedding light on the matter. Craig and Laura Schneller anxiously waited at the police station, having heard that something terrible had happened at their daughter's home. Unfortunately, they had been unable to contact Brianna, and their hearts were heavy with worry. The officers had to tell the parents Brianna that their worst fears had come true. The news was devastating. Their daughter, Brianna, had passed away. The loss of a child is one of the greatest sorrows a parent can experience, and for the Schnellers, it was a life-altering moment. To confirm the identity, the authorities showed them photographs of Brianna, but only those that clearly showed her face, as some of the other images were too graphic. After confirming the tragic news, the Schnellers were in shock. With the help of a psychologist, they were able to compose themselves and answer questions from the police. They were eager to assist in the investigation and help catch the person responsible. The Schnellers provided as much information as they could about their daughter's life, but they insisted that she had no known enemies. They also revealed that Brianna's mother had been the last person she had spoken to that morning. Her mother, Craig, took Brianna's car to the repair shop and messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to let her know. Brianna replied to the message. The investigation shows that the tragedy occurred at a point in time that was after they sent messages to each other and before Hugo's arrival. As part of their inquiry, detectives first interviewed the Ramirez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, questioning them separately. Sebastian, Brianna's fiancé, stated that he woke up at 9:15 a.m., had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke up his brother, Hugo. Around 10:15 a.m. Sebastian claimed he was already at the restaurant when he received a phone call informing him about the incident. Hugo's account corroborated Sebastian's, saying he left the house around 10:15 a.m., shortly after his brother. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. due to feeling unwell and wanting to rest. When Hugo found Brianna's body, his reported illness and fatigue vanished almost instantly. The events that followed were a daze. He was so shocked that he couldn't think clearly about how to respond. His mind went blank, and his hands shook uncontrollably, prompting him to seek help from a neighbor. The Ramirez brothers' accounts were believable, and their distress seemed authentic. Nevertheless, the police had seen convincing performances before, so they needed concrete evidence to confirm their innocence. It was possible that one of the brothers was involved in the crime and the other was covering for him. To investigate this, detectives asked about their relationships with each other. Sebastian expressed his love for Brianna and his excitement for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was questioned about whether he had any issues with Brianna or if they had argued, but he denied it. Hugo also explained that while he found her attractive and charming, he had no romantic intentions towards her because he valued his good relationship with his brother and would never jeopardize his happiness. Brianna was like a sister to Hugo. And after hours of questioning, neither Hugo nor Sebastian raised any suspicions. The police took DNA samples from the brothers and allowed them to return home. To verify the brothers' alibis, detectives spoke with employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the restaurant's security footage. The brothers' accounts checked out, and the possibility of a domestic-related crime was ruled out. The investigation continued, and the question remained, who could have committed such a heinous crime against an innocent young woman? Was there a predator lurking in the city who had been watching Brianna and waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The police considered this possibility as they analyzed the evidence. The autopsy results confirmed the police's initial suspicions. The sequence of events was reconstructed as follows. Brianna was first hit on the head with a blunt object, likely an iron, which caused a severe injury. The perpetrator then cut her throat and inflicted multiple stab wounds to her body. The attack was extremely violent, with so many wounds that even experts couldn't count them all. At least 2 of the injuries were fatal. DNA from an unknown source was found under Brianna's fingernails, indicating that she struggled and resisted her attacker. Initial reports that nothing was missing from Brianna's home were later found to be incorrect. Brianna's phone had actually been taken, and Sebastian was the one who discovered its loss and informed the detectives. This new information became a crucial lead in the investigation. The police learned from the phone provider that the phone was still active and obtained its location. Surprisingly, the phone was found to be nearby, specifically on the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. This revelation added complexity to the case, given the brothers' solid alibi and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the missing phone. The detectives rushed to the location and found that the phone's coordinates led them to the parking lot of a shopping center that housed the restaurant. A search of the area revealed that the phone was likely in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found in a container. Inside the bag were the victim's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves had a blood stain. The bag and its contents were sent to the lab for further analysis, which could potentially yield fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. After seeing a photo of the bag's contents, Sebastian identified his girlfriend's underwear. The police then questioned the restaurant staff multiple times. On May 5th, they asked everyone to provide a DNA sample and checked for any scratches or injuries. They also carefully reviewed all the surveillance footage, both inside and outside the building and nearby businesses. The police had a challenging task to figure out who had thrown away the bag. A kitchen worker initially caught the investigators' attention because he arrived late to work after Brianna had already been found lifeless. However, he had a solid alibi. He had been pulled over for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Reviewing the security footage was crucial to the investigation, which led them to another suspect, Raul Ponce Rocha, the 24-year-old kitchen manager. On the day of the crime, Raul left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned 35 minutes later, at 10:53 a.m., without it. When questioned, Raul explained that he had gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant, who lived in the same building as Brianna and her colleagues. Raul claimed the trip took about 20 minutes, but there was a 15-minute gap in his timeline that he refused to explain. Luciano corroborated Raul's story, stating they drove straight to work without stopping. Nevertheless, the detectives remained skeptical about the unaccounted 15 minutes and Raul's suspicious behavior. Raul Ponce Rocha, the manager of El Tequila Salsa, had raised suspicions due to the cuts on his hands, which he claimed were from working with knives. However, there was not enough evidence to detain him at that point. Further investigation revealed that on May 2nd at 1:16 p.m., a single employee had exited the back door of the restaurant, and at the same time, only one person had approached the trash bins. This led to the quick identification of the suspect, who was surprisingly Raul Ponce Rocha, not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez as initially suspected. A search warrant was obtained for Raul's home, and the search uncovered some peculiar items. Under his mattress, investigators found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos, a brown hoodie, and a glove similar to the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag, and a strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. All the evidence pointed to Brianna. It was only a matter of time before the test results confirmed the match. Raul was eventually arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. Sebastian was stunned when he learned that a suspect had been identified in the brutal crime. He had trouble believing that his co-worker, Raul Ponce Rocha, could be capable of such a heinous act. What motivated Raul to commit this crime, especially since he barely knew Brianna? Sebastian's impression of Raul was that he was a friendly and harmless person. The mystery began to unravel in 2011 when Raul stood trial. Despite a lengthy investigation, Raul consistently denied any involvement in the crime and never admitted guilt. However, the prosecution presented strong evidence that contradicted his claims. Raul's DNA was found on several key pieces of evidence, including the iron, knives, a plastic bag, and its contents, as well as under Brianna's fingernails. A shoe print at the crime scene also matched Raul's shoes. The evidence pieced together the events of May 2, 2009. On his way to work that day, Raul passed by Brianna's house, a place that had long fascinated him. Assuming she was out, since her car was not in the driveway, he took advantage of the opportunity to break into her apartment and take what he wanted. Raul had a disturbing habit of collecting women's underwear, with evidence found hidden under his mattress. On the day of the incident, Raul left work, supposedly to pick up his friend Luciano, but instead entered Brianna's apartment without warning. He easily gained entry, suggesting he may have had a key, and went directly to Brianna's room, where he began rummaging through her belongings. When Brianna confronted him, Raul was likely caught off guard and feared being recognized. Panicked, he grabbed the nearest object, an iron, and used it to strike her. He then escalated the violence by slashing her throat with a knife and inflicting multiple other injuries. The investigation found that the killer appeared to take pleasure in the brutal act, as evidenced by the numerous and excessive wounds inflicted on the victim. The attacker also used multiple knives during the assault. After committing the crime, Raul attempted to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, which was likely stained with blood. He then calmly returned to work, pretending nothing had happened, and drove Luciano to the restaurant as planned. Raul took advantage of the lunch break to dispose of the evidence bag in a trash bin, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. Before the trial, Raul admitted to meeting with Brianna but claimed he didn't kill her. However, he suspected someone else might have and named a former restaurant employee. Raul stated that he saw this acquaintance, Sergio, at Brianna's house on the day she died. This confirmed that Raul had indeed entered the Ramirez apartment. However, when Raul left, Sergio stayed behind and had an argument with Brianna. Raul's statement raised more questions and led to further investigations. The authorities verified the information and managed to contact Sergio, who was abroad at the time. Sergio appeared at the trial and testified that he was not involved in Brianna's death. He proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime, as he had left weeks earlier to care for his ill father in Mexico. It became clear that Raul had hoped to falsely accuse Sergio and create doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed, and Raul's actions showed that he had no qualms about accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime, and he felt no remorse for his actions. The trial of Raul Ponce Rocha drew a large crowd, including Brianna's family members and her friends Sebastian and Hugo. The young men struggled to keep their emotions in check, prompting officers to intervene multiple times to restore calm. In the end, Raul was found guilty of murdering Brianna Schneller and burglary, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at a correctional facility in Wisconsin. After the verdict, Brianna's father expressed his gratitude that justice had been served. He shared that he still keeps a Father's Day card Brianna gave him and cherishes every memory of her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michael Van Eck. Michael Van Eck was born on August 14, 1987, in a city that was once a hub for gold miners. He was the only son among four sisters, Natasha, Michelle, Bianca, and Friana, and grew up in a close-knit family. His parents were caring and provided a comfortable life for their children. Michael's father worked hard to establish his own business, while his mother created a nurturing environment at home that encouraged the growth and development of her children. Michael was a sociable and kind person who excelled in school and sports, earning a black belt in karate that gave him confidence. After completing his education, Michael trained as an electrician, a highly sought-after profession that offered good earnings and job prospects. He worked at the Beatrix mine in the small town of Unison, where he was employed at mine number 4. Not content to rest on his laurels, Michael continued his education to become an engineer. In 2011, Michael, then 23 years old, joined a dating site to cope with a recent breakup and expand his social circle. It seemed like a stroke of luck when he came across the profile of a sweet and smiling young woman that caught his eye. During the ongoing conversation, the man discovered that they shared common interests. Similar to him, she disliked loud parties and excessive drinking, and sought a genuine, meaningful relationship and a strong family foundation. Michael was pleasantly surprised to find a compatible match online. Living with his parents at the time, he shared his excitement and concerns with his mother. On April 2nd, he confided in her about his upcoming date and made an effort to prepare and make a good impression. He withdrew his first paycheck of 1,000 Rand from his account. The only thing that gave him pause was the unusual location his online friend had chosen for their first meeting, the city cemetery. To avoid worrying his parents, he kept this detail to himself. Around 9 p.m. that evening, Michael bid farewell to his family and left the house. He drove to the designated location in his silver Pajero 2007, a gift from his parents for his 18th birthday. As expected, she was running a bit late, but her appearance was striking. She from the internet arrived dressed in a pristine white dress and smiled warmly. The conversation flowed easily, and afterwards, she suggested continuing the evening elsewhere in the cemetery. She invited him to a secluded area with a blanket spread out on the grass, accompanied by a basket of fruit and wine. Michael and his friends had just finished their drinks when his beautiful companion suddenly kissed him. At first, the kiss was pleasant, but it quickly turned into a painful and horrific experience. Unbeknownst to Michael, this kiss was the beginning of a sinister plot. Jane Van Heerden was born in 1991 to parents who were struggling in their marriage. When her mother discovered she was pregnant, they decided to put their divorce on hold and try to work through their issues. However, their efforts were unsuccessful, and the situation at home continued to deteriorate. Unfortunately for Jane, her mother resented her presence, seeing her as a constant reminder of her unhappy marriage. Even after the divorce, Jane's mother held on to her negative feelings, making it difficult for Jane to feel loved and accepted. Chane's behavioral issues and cold demeanor towards her children persisted even after her marriage ended. As a result, her 3 children felt isolated and misunderstood, with Chane, in particular, struggling the most. From a young age, she became withdrawn and sullen, displaying psychological problems. Her behavior became increasingly disturbing, as she frequently talked about death and created confusing artwork. She also developed an imaginary friend named Azael. Her grandparents, concerned about her well-being, suspected she might be possessed and took her to church for an exorcism. During the ritual, Chane's body convulsed, which was likely due to her fear of crowds and the intense anxiety she felt during the ordeal, possibly triggering an epileptic seizure. The traumatic experience had a lasting impact on her memory, causing her to develop a deep-seated fear of the dark. This phobia was further exacerbated by her mother's frightening statement that toys come to life at night, leading Chane to take drastic measures to protect herself, such as taping her doll's eyes shut and restraining them with shoelaces. Chane's mental condition took a turn for the worse as she entered preteen years. At 10 years old, she had a disturbing episode where she threatened a family guest with a knife while visiting her father. This incident prompted her family to seek professional help, and she was evaluated by a specialist who prescribed sedatives. The medication had a positive impact on her mood and overall well-being for a time. During a period of calm, Chane's father made a conscious effort to spend more time with her, often picking her up from school and taking her on hunting trips. He hoped that by sharing his hobby, he could provide her with the attention and connection she craved. Chane found enjoyment in her father's activities, particularly in tasks like butchering and skinning animals. However, this fascination led her to begin collecting and bringing home the carcasses of small animals, starting with rats and birds, and escalating to cats and dogs. She also took to cutting flesh and occasionally self-inflicted injuries. As it turned out, around age 12, Chane had befriended a man who introduced her to substance use and took advantage of her vulnerability. Fortunately, she ended the toxic relationship on her own, although her sisters had initially kept the situation hidden from their parents. Chane's emotional state was negatively affected by her chaotic childhood. At the age of 15, her mother left for New Zealand, where she started a new relationship and never returned to care for her children. Chane and her siblings were left in the care of their father and stepmother, who did their best to provide for them, but struggled to understand the depth of Chane's emotional issues. Her family initially attributed her behavior to typical teenage struggles. However, her situation took a turn for the worse when she became involved with a 22-year-old man who was interested in Satanism, occultism, and voodoo cults. He had a profound influence on Chane, but his cruel nature often left her feeling belittled and suppressed. Fortunately, Chane's life began to turn around with the support of her family and therapy. By the time she turned 17, she had distanced herself from the negative influences in her life, graduated from high school, and enrolled in college to study art and graphic design. As she lost interest in Satanism and stopped using substances that were harming her, her emotional well-being began to improve. Chane thrived in her studies and landed a job in her field, where she received support from both her colleagues and management. She discovered a natural talent for visual arts, earning her respect and recognition in her profession. At the same time, she began a romantic relationship with a man named Warren. To those outside her inner circle, Chane's life seemed perfectly ordinary. Her family and close friends avoided discussing her past, hoping that the difficult times were behind her. However, it was unclear what was happening beneath the surface. It's possible that her inner struggles were simply waiting to resurface. Her father, in particular, was overjoyed for Chane, believing she had finally found stability and would soon get married. However, his expectations were not fulfilled. A surprising challenge arose from Warren's friend Roy, a self-proclaimed sensitive person. Although Chane came across as kind and friendly, Roy detected something off-putting and even evil about her. He suspected that Chane might be unfaithful to his friend, so he decided to confront her about it. However, instead of answering his question, Chane became enraged and spat in his face, telling him to stop asking her ridiculous questions. At a party, Chane noticed Martin, a 24-year-old from a well-respected family. Despite his calm and sociable nature, rumors surrounded him. Born into a privileged family, Martin had a happy childhood, excelling academically and behaving well. However, at 6, he began experiencing hallucinations, convinced by an entity that he possessed incredible strength. As he grew older, his mental health declined, and his behavior changed due to struggles at school and home. At 14, Martin was hospitalized for psychiatric treatment and diagnosed with schizophrenia. Unfortunately, standard treatments were ineffective. His financially secure family dedicated themselves to finding alternative medications, eventually discovering the necessary drugs to control his condition, except for occasional aggressive outbursts. Martin was deeply affected by witnessing a stray cat being attacked by dogs. Instead of feeling revulsion or sympathy, he chose to hide the cat's body and observe it. This disturbing incident marked the beginning of his animal torture. He eventually dropped out of school and started working with his father in the carpentry shop, aspiring to follow in his family's footsteps. As he worked, his condition showed signs of improvement, and he lost the desire to harm animals. Feeling in control, he made the decision to stop taking his medication, despite concerns from those around him. However, this decision ultimately proved to be a grave mistake. Martin's mental state gradually declined, and it was during this time that he met Chane. Their relationship seemed happy and normal to outsiders, and their parents were initially pleased with their union. But neither set of parents was aware of the dark history of their children, and their relationship ultimately led to devastating consequences. Initially, they was outgoing and social, attending parties and interacting with others. However, acquaintances began to notice cuts on their hands, which they jokingly attributed to intimate experiments. Over time, they became increasingly reclusive and developed an interest in dark and occult practices, including Satanism and voodoo cults. They also became fascinated with notorious serial killers. In February 2011, Martin posted a photo of himself and Chane on social media, with the caption, "Killers," accompanied by a cryptic emoji. At the time, no one suspected that the post was anything more than a joke. Meanwhile, Martin asked Chane's father for permission to marry her, which was met with enthusiasm. However, unbeknownst to those around them, they harbored a sinister secret. Instead of dreaming of a future together, they fantasized about ending their lives in a violent manner. These dark fantasies eventually evolved into a twisted plan to torture and kill homeless individuals. They even practiced their twisted intentions on animals, due to unable to find a suitable human victim to carry out their heinous plan. Chane created a profile on a dating site, which caught the attention of a young man named Michael Van Eck. Chane and her partner, Martin, targeted Michael for their sinister plans. They began flirting with Michael online, and after a few days, Chane suggested they meet in person. Despite the unusual location, Michael agreed to the meeting. Chane and Martin carefully planned the encounter, considering every detail, including their attire and the means to commit a crime. Chane approached the meeting prepared, while Martin hid behind tombstones, waiting for a signal. When Chane kissed Michael, it was the agreed-upon signal for Martin to attack. He struck Michael with a knife from behind, but Michael unexpectedly resisted. Chane intervened, and together they inflicted around 30 knife wounds on Michael. As Michael begged for an end to his suffering, Martin slit his throat, ultimately killing him. The perpetrators then dragged the body onto a blanket and began to carry out their plan. They cut off the victim's legs at the knee and severed his head. The dismembered body parts were placed in bags. The perpetrators attempted to bury the body at the site, but they encountered a problem that they had no shovels. As a result, they were forced to dig a shallow grave using only their hands and knives. After managing to bury the body only halfway, the perpetrators left the scene, taking the severed body parts with them. They used the victim's vehicle to make their getaway, with Martin initially driving, but later handing over control to his accomplice. However, the adrenaline rush from their crime made it difficult for them to focus on the road. Once they arrived home, they stored the bags containing the body parts in the refrigerator, treating them like ordinary groceries. After Martin had somewhat composed himself, he got into the victim's car and drove it to a high-crime neighborhood, hoping that it would be stolen. He left the car unlocked with the keys in the ignition to make it an easy target. A cemetery worker noticed bloody stains and torn clothing in the bushes near the grave. After alerting his supervisor, they called the authorities to report the gruesome find. The police were immediately notified, and an investigation was launched. Meanwhile, Michael Van Eck's parents were frantic with worry. Their son had been unreachable since the previous evening, which was unusual, even if he had stayed overnight with his internet girlfriend. When Michael failed to show up for work, his employer called his parents to ask about his absence. Around the same time, police received a report about an abandoned car with blood stains on the trunk. The vehicle was identified as belonging to Michael Van Eck through a database search. Further investigation revealed that the car had been parked at the cemetery for an extended period. With this new information, police officers visited the Van Eck residence, where they confirmed their suspicions. Michael's mother had been searching for him since the previous day. The officers then asked her to come to the cemetery, where forensic experts and search dogs were working to locate missing body parts. The investigation revealed that the victim's mother identified her son's body through distinctive burn marks he had sustained in childhood. The autopsy confirmed that the victim had suffered multiple knife wounds and showed signs of a struggle. The body had been dismembered after death, which suggested that the perpetrators had some level of expertise in this area. The number and nature of the wounds, as well as the strength required to subdue the victim, indicated that multiple attackers were involved. DNA testing later confirmed the identity of the victim as 23-year-old Michael Van Eck. During the investigation, police seized the victim's cell phone and computer, which revealed that the last person he had communicated with was Cheyne Van Heerden. According to their messages, she had invited him to meet at the cemetery on the night of his death. Detectives brought Cheyne in for questioning, and she arrived with her boyfriend, Martin. Both were interviewed separately and eventually confessed to being involved in the victim's murder. Upon learning of the incident, Cheyne's father rushed to the station, where he was shocked to hear the accusations against his daughter. When he asked her if the allegations were true, Cheyne calmly confirmed her involvement and stated that she would willingly do it again. She claimed that she had fantasized about committing such a crime ever since she started hunting with her father. This cruel confession shocked not only her father but also everyone present. As the case gained public attention, Cheyne's boyfriend, Martin, also showed no remorse. Instead, he seemed to enjoy the public scrutiny and posed for cameras. It became clear that neither Cheyne nor Martin felt any regret for their actions. Investigations revealed that they had planned to take their own lives if caught, but Martin's changed his mind, and Cheyne followed suit. They wanted to live a life of notoriety, embracing their dark impulses. A search of their apartment revealed a disturbing environment. The walls were adorned with distorted portraits of Cheyne, depicting her without eyes, mouth, or ears. The rooms also contained ritual items, animal scalps, knives, and other objects of unclear purpose. Police found the deceased young man's belongings, including his glasses and wallet, which Martins later confessed they had taken to prepare their next crime. The most disturbing discovery was made in the refrigerator, where police found Michael's severed head with his mouth sewn shut. It is believed that the perpetrators intended to use his head as a ritualistic bowl. The victim's eyes and ears were found in separate containers. Additionally, The victim's hand and leg were discovered buried near the murderer's home, alongside the remains of various animals. The perpetrator's diary revealed horrific thoughts and plans for future crimes. The evidence collected during the investigation made it clear that the perpetrators had planned to commit multiple crimes, and that the process of taking lives and mutilating bodies brought them immense pleasure. Martin and Chane underwent multiple evaluations to assess their mental competence. The commission confirmed that they were aware of their actions and understood the consequences. In November 2011, Chane's trial took place. Despite this being her first offense, she was treated as a serial offender. She openly expressed her desire to repeat her actions and told the court that she understood she should feel shame or remorse, but couldn't. She could only comprehend the severity of her actions through societal standards and the reactions of others. Psychiatrists diagnosed Chane with psychopathic and antisocial disorders, which made her more dangerous than her boyfriend. However, she was skilled at hiding her true nature. Throughout the sentencing, Chane remained impassive. She was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole, 20 years for taking a life and an additional 15 years for robbery and dismemberment. Martin defended himself in court, claiming he didn't remember the events until he was in jail. He admitted to studying Satanism and occultism, and said his relationship with Chane led them to commit the crime. He apologized to the victim's parents, but his words seemed insincere. He was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison, with a chance for parole after serving half his sentence. Even in prison, Martin expressed his passion for Chane in letters, calling her a dark goddess. However, Chane eventually ended the relationship, feeling they had grown apart. While incarcerated, Chane proved to be a model prisoner, using her time to teach art and theology to her fellow inmates. In contrast, Martin, while also in prison, gained a small group of admirers who were carefully monitored by police to prevent them from copying his crimes. During his imprisonment, Martin's focused on personal growth, completing his education through correspondence courses and undergoing therapy. Their stories serve as a warning that ordinary individuals can hide dark secrets. Michael, a kind and compassionate person, was manipulated by two individuals with twisted motivations. This tragic event emphasizes the importance of being cautious about the people we surround ourselves with, as their influence can have a profound and lasting impact on our lives. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Agnes Klavina. Agnes Klavina was born on July 8, 1984, in Riga, the capital of Latvia. She grew up in a typical family with her parents and older sister, Greta. They sisters were extremely close, with only a couple of years between them. Their parents worked hard to provide them with a good education and support their dreams. Agnes was a lively and outgoing young girl who excelled in school, enjoyed sports, and had many friends. Her dream was to pursue a career in tourism or entertainment, as she loved to travel and was skilled at organizing fun leisure activities. Her bright personality and attractive appearance also drew attention from men, who frequently complimented her. From a young age, Agnes had many admirers vying for her attention. After completing her education, Agnes worked in the service industry while taking language courses and studying to become a tourism manager. At 20, she decided to leave her hometown in Latvia and move to London, seeking greater opportunities to develop her skills and talents. Her parents and older sister supported her decision, and soon after her move, Agnes met Michael Mills, a successful businessman 8 years her senior. He was well-educated, owned a thriving business, and had recently opened a movie theater and entertainment complex. Agnes and Michael quickly connected and started dating. He showered her with attention, gifts, and luxury travel. They made ambitious plans for their future together, and their love seemed destined to last. Agnes's friends and family remember this as her first true love. She radiated happiness beside Michael and envisioned a future as his wife. In 2014, Agnes received a 3-month contract as an administrator at a popular nightclub in Marbella, Spain. This opportunity required her to temporarily relocate, but she was eager to take on the challenge. Michael, unable to leave his life behind, supported her decision to sign the contract. For Agnes, this was a chance to gain valuable experience and potentially launch a new career path. Marbella, a renowned resort on the Mediterranean coast, attracts vacationers from around the world, particularly the wealthy. It's not uncommon to spot celebrities, athletes, and business leaders in the area. Kavina, being a sociable person, enjoyed working in such a vibrant environment. Before relocating, she visited her family in Latvia and shared the news of her 3-month employment contract. She also announced her plans to marry Michael upon her return to England. Her family was thrilled for Agnes and wished her well. In May 2014, Agnes packed lightly and moved to Spain for the season, while Michael remained in London. They stayed in touch through daily phone calls and video chats, sharing updates about their lives. Agnes was active on social media, posting daily updates, photos, and videos, which drew a large following interested in her life and work. Agnes had a vibrant and busy life, making the most of every day. After her employment contract ended, she decided to stay in Spain for a couple of months. The resort was entering its peak season, and she saw an opportunity to earn a good income. She discussed her plan with her Michael, who was supportive and promised to visit her for a few days since they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Agnes quickly landed a job as a hostess at an upscale restaurant and renewed her lease. As planned, her boyfriend, Michael, visited her in September. During his visit, they had a great time, planned their upcoming wedding, and picked a destination for their honeymoon. Michael had to return to London after less than a week, leaving Agnes to work in Spain for another month. After that, she planned to visit her relatives in Latvia before flying to England to join her Michael. Unfortunately, these plans never came to fruition. Agnes went to the popular Costa del Sol nightclub with friends on September 6th. Earlier in the day, she had informed Michael of her plans and he approved. Agnes and her friends had a great time at the club, and Agnes even posted some photos on her online profile. She wore a striking mini dress and carried a small white clutch that night. As the night wore on and her friends prepared to leave, Agnes decided to stay a bit longer and then take a taxi home. Her friends didn't worry about her, as she was responsible and hadn't had much to drink. When they said their goodbyes and headed out, Agnes was chatting with a man who had bought her a drink and was trying to get her attention. After that night, Agnes disappeared without a trace. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. No one could recall what time she left the club, who she left with, or where she went afterwards. Agnes failed to show up at work the next day, and attempts to contact her were unsuccessful as her phone was turned off. Her colleagues and friends immediately raised concerns, but the police were slow to respond to the missing persons report. As the day drew to a close, a worried Michael called Agnes's mother to report that he had been unable to reach his fiancée all day, which was unusual. The following day, Agnes's parents and Michael jointly tried to contact the Spanish police to report her disappearance, but they were informed that a missing persons report could only be filed in person by a relative. Undeterred, Michael and Agnes's family booked the next available flight to Marbella. It wasn't until 5 days after Agnes's disappearance that her family was able to file a missing persons report. The investigation began with a search of Agnes's rented apartment, which appeared to be untouched, as if she had simply stepped out for a short time. Her documents, money, and expensive jewelry were still in place, the refrigerator was stocked with prepared meals, and several outfits were laid out on the bed, suggesting that Agnes had been preparing to go out, likely to the club on the night she vanished. To aid in the search, Agnes's friends and family distributed flyers with her picture throughout the city, and the media picked up the story, featuring it on TV news programs and the front pages of local newspapers. The police reviewed footage from CCTV cameras inside and outside the entertainment venue, but encountered a setback. The files had already been deleted. However, with the help of specialists, they were able to recover the recordings. One of the restored videos, taken by a camera near the parking lot exit, showed Agnes leaving the club around 6 a.m. with a man. It was clear that she did not leave voluntarily. The final footage, which showed Agnes alive, was thoroughly examined by experts. However, the more they studied the footage, the more alarming it became. Agnes was seen being led by a man to the parking lot, clearly under duress. He had a tight grip on her waist, and Agnes looked frightened. She attempted to break free multiple times and appeared to be saying something emotional, but he persisted in leading her to a Mercedes A63 with tinted windows. As he forced Agnes into the car, it became clear that another person was already inside. Meanwhile, the first man got into the driver's seat. Agnes temporarily managed to open the car door and tried to escape, but he who had been standing next to her, likely the doorman, intervened and pushed her back into the car at the driver's signal. In return for his assistance, the driver appeared to hand the doorman something, presumably a cash reward. Agnes's phone was turned off 6 minutes after she got into the car, and it was never turned back on. The vehicle's subsequent movements couldn't be tracked because there were no CCTV cameras along the route. It became clear that the men in the cabin were the last people to see Agnes before she went missing. Despite this, the case was shrouded in secrecy from the start. Everyone involved in the investigation signed confidentiality agreements, and information was kept from the press and even Agnes's loved ones. For the first few months, Agnes's parents and Michael were left in the dark, with only vague updates that the investigation was ongoing and that it was too early to draw conclusions. As time passed without any word from Agnes, hope began to dwindle. Agnes's fiancé, Michael, periodically gave interviews pleading for help in finding her, but no one ever came forward with information. It wasn't until 6 months later that Agnes's relatives were finally shown footage from the club's cameras and given the names of the 3 men who had last been in contact with her. Wesley Capper, the son of a wealthy British millionaire, was identified as he who forcibly removed Agnes from a club and pushed her into a car. Wesley Capper was accompanied by his longtime friend, Craig Porter, who had no specific occupation and had previously been on the police's radar. A third man, Cyan Usman, a dark-skinned doorman, was also in the car. Under interrogation, all 3 men claimed they were innocent, stating that Agnes had voluntarily gotten into the car. According to Wesley Capper, he and a friend had met Agnes at a club and approached her to strike up a conversation. Wesley Capper claimed that Agnes was already intoxicated, but this contradicts the testimony of her friends. He also stated that Agnes had accepted a drink from him and his friend. Capper then invited Agnes to continue the party at his luxurious country home, which she allegedly agreed to. However, Wesley Capper claims that Agnes changed her mind once they were in the car and asked to be dropped off in the middle of the road, stating that she would take a cab home. Wesley Capper claimed that he dropped Agnes off at her requested location, which was an unlit stretch of road with no CCTV cameras. Craig Porter couldn't confirm or deny Wesley Capper's statement about Agnes's presence in their car. According to Porter's own admission, he was also extremely drunk and didn't know how or when Agnes got into the vehicle. He fell asleep shortly after leaving the parking lot and only woke up to find Agnes was no longer in the car. The doorman, Cyan Usman, confirmed that Agnes was intoxicated, but he couldn't say if she voluntarily got into the car. However, he did say that when the car moved, Agnes opened the door and nearly fell out. The driver then asked him to close the door, for which he received a large tip. When questioned, Cyan Usman said he didn't think Agnes's attempt to get out of the car was an escape attempt. In his opinion, she might have accidentally opened the door due to her intoxication. He also noted that Agnes didn't scream or ask for help during the incident. The security footage clearly shows Wesley Capper forcibly leading Agnes to the car, holding her by the waist and wrist. However, Wesley's defense is that Agnes was dizzy and he was only holding her to prevent her from falling. Later in the investigation, another unsettling video came to light, shot in the south of Spain, specifically at the Puerta de la Dua in the Su Grande Marina. The footage was of the luxury yacht belonging to John Capper, a millionaire and the father of one of the suspects. Dated September 10th, just 4 days after Agnes went missing, it showed Wesley Capper and 2 other men boarding the yacht. Notably, they carried a heavy suitcase and what appeared to be a rolled-up carpet. However, when questioned about this footage, Wesley Capper explained that he and his friends had traveled to the yacht simply to have a good time. He claimed the suitcase was packed with their belongings and what seemed to be a carpet was actually bedding. Wesley Capper failed to account for where everything had gone, considering none of these items were seen upon their return. The investigators meticulously searched the yacht and the automobile, only to find nothing of consequence because both vehicles had been thoroughly cleaned, thus destroying any possible DNA evidence. Interestingly, during this exhaustive search, a blonde hair was found in a car trunk, although determining its origin was not feasible as the hair itself had strangely disappeared over the course of the investigation, marking another puzzle within this intriguing case. A few hours after Agnes was last seen in the defendant's car, Wesley Capper made several calls to emergency services, but hung up each time without waiting for an answer. It seemed as though he was afraid or uncertain about what to do. Wesley Capper claimed he was drunk and made the calls randomly. The lawyer for the Agnes family argued that Agnes was likely already dead, and her body was probably at the bottom of the sea, hidden in the suitcase the suspects had brought on board the yacht. He also believed that the case had been intentionally delayed, giving the suspects ample time to destroy any evidence that could prove their guilt. It wasn't until a year and a half after Agnes's disappearance that Wesley Capper, Porter, and Usman were finally brought to trial. They were accused of holding Agnes against her will and forcing her into a car. Unfortunately, due to a lack of evidence, no further charges could be made. This decision outraged Agnes's relatives, but the judge stood firm. In 2019, nearly 5 years after Agnes's disappearance, the 3 men were brought to trial again. Despite the prolonged period, they continued to deny their guilt, claiming that Agnes voluntarily got into the car. The prosecutor argued that the doorman should be considered an accomplice for helping the defendants drive the victim away. The doorman, Usman, could have faced a 5-year prison sentence. Instead, he defended himself, stating that he was a suspect due to his skin color and lack of access to a good lawyer. He claimed that he sent all his earnings to a starving family in Africa. Wesley Capper and lawyers argued that their clients were only guilty of persuading Agnes to get into the car, not forcing her. They believed that Agnes was dropped off on the road as requested, but was possibly kidnapped and killed by someone else while waiting for a cab. The judge's verdict was met with surprise and anger from Agnes's relatives, as none of the defendants received any punishment. Usman was acquitted of all charges. Wesley Capper was given a 2-year sentence for taking advantage of Agnes's intoxication to coax her into his car, and Porter received a 6-month sentence for aiding Wesley Capper's actions. However, they received suspended sentences and did not serve any time in prison. Instead, they paid Agnes's family £101,000 in compensation. Agnes's family was unhappy with the outcome and decided to appeal. It later came to light that the defendants had both committed further offenses while awaiting the court's decision. Wesley Capper, who was intoxicated by alcohol and drugs at the time, hit and killed a woman with his vehicle and then fled the scene. Meanwhile, Porter and a friend, who were also intoxicated, stole a car after violently assaulting its owner. Wesley Capper received a surprisingly lenient sentence of probation for his serious crime, thanks to his lawyer's skilled defense. As part of his sentence, he paid a substantial amount of compensation to the family of she he had killed in a car accident. In contrast, Porter was not as fortunate and was sent to jail, although the exact length of his sentence is not publicly known. Nearly 7 years after Agnes's disappearance, the prime suspect in her case finally faced consequences. However, it wasn't the law that caught up with Wesley Capper, but his own destructive lifestyle. Years of substance abuse took a serious toll on his health. During the -19 pandemic, Capper was hospitalized, and after beginning to recover from the illness, he suffered a stroke. He passed away on July 26, 2021, at the age of 44. At that time, Agnes's parents appealed to the court again, but unfortunately, the suspect had since passed away and could no longer face prosecution. Despite this development, the case was still before the Supreme Court, although a new turn of events would arise 9 years later, long after Agnes's fate had been presumed, her body never found, alive or dead. Following this, her parents, sister Michael, and their lawyer converged on a plausible theory. It suggested that the perpetrators had likely disposed of Agnes's body in a suitcase that was secretly boarded on a yacht, eventually dropped in a distant, undisclosed part of the open ocean. In mid-June, a gardener at the exclusive Lida Golf Club in the Costa del Sol region discovered a mysterious object near the coast while cleaning the area. Upon closer inspection, the object turned out to be an old, badly damaged suitcase. The gardener did not attempt to open it and instead called the police. When law enforcement officers opened the suitcase, they found human remains inside. Further examination revealed that the remains belonged to she, approximately 25 to 35 years old at the time of her death. It was also determined that the suitcase had been submerged in water for around 10 years before washing up on the shore. Based on these findings, the police hypothesized that the remains might belong to Agnes, a woman who had gone missing 9 years ago. To confirm this theory, investigators are conducting DNA tests to compare Agnes's DNA with the remains found in the suitcase. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Luz Maria Lopez. Luz Maria Lopez was born on March 17, 1995, in San Cristobal Verapaz, a small town, to a modest family. She was the youngest of 2 children. Her parents, Al Morales and Brian, raised her along with her older brother, Omar. Luz Maria's early life was marked by a serious health scare. As an infant, she nearly died due to an intestinal obstruction and underwent a complex surgery. Although her doctors were uncertain about her chances of recovery, her mother's prayers and faith played a significant role in Luz Maria's survival. Fortunately, the surgery did not affect Luz Maria's development. She grew up to be a healthy and active child. During her school years, Luz Maria was a sporty. She was actively involved in gymnastics, athletics, and classical dance. She easily makes friends with everyone and got along with people from different backgrounds. Luz Maria excelled academically, particularly in the humanities. After completing her secondary education, Luz Maria decided to pursue higher education at a prestigious state university. She chose to study law and later specialized in criminalistics, a field that had always fascinated her. A fateful encounter took place when Luz Maria accompanied her mother to a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. The occasion was her older brother's 25th birthday, and the family wanted to surprise him with a motorcycle he had always desired. Inside the dealership, they were warmly greeted by a courteous and attentive young sales consultant named Jorge, who showcased the available models, offering some advice. Although Luz Maria and her mother have already chosen a model, but they want to consider and discuss it with her father before making a decision to buy it. As they left, they took a business card from the dealership and Luz Maria left her phone number for further communication. Shortly after, she received a call from Jorge himself, but instead of discussing the potential purchase, the conversation turned to a more personal subject. Over the following days, Jorge contacted Luz Maria several times, gradually building up the courage to invite her to meet at a coffee shop. Jorge was clearly smitten with Luz Maria, the beautiful, sultry brunette, but he didn't know how to approach her. Luckily, Luz Maria also liked Jorge, and when he asked to meet, she happily agreed. Although Luz Maria was a year younger, their small age difference wasn't an issue. They fell deeply in love, both believing it was love at first sight, and that a long, happy life was ahead. A few short months into their relationship, they decided to live together, despite parental objections. They had a small, private wedding, attended only by close friends and family. However, their special day almost got derailed due to a mishap at the banquet venue. They had to cough up extra cash to save the celebration, which wedding ultimately took place on schedule. Jorge was born in 1996 in Santa Catalina Latina, a town in central Guatemala. Jorge and his younger brother, Pablo, grew up in a low-income household. His family struggled financially, so as children, they did not have the luxury of fine clothes and expensive toys, as the family's limited income only covered the most basic needs. Even though Jorge grew up in difficult circumstances, he seemed to have no motivation to change his life for the better. He lived life at his own pace, choosing to enjoy simple pleasures rather than strive for advanced degrees or job security. Those who knew Jorge described him as introverted, unsociable, and having few close relationships, especially with women. When he met the love of his life, Luz Maria, he went all out to win her heart and quickly proposed, fearing she might change her mind. However, Luz Maria's parents, Morales and Brian, were suspicious of him from the start. They couldn't quite put their finger on what it was about him that they didn't like, but they couldn't convince their daughter to call off the wedding. The marriage turned out to be unhappy. After the wedding, Luz Maria became pregnant, but she had not yet finished her university degree and struggled to find a good job. Due to her lack of experience and health issues, she had to accept short-term, low-skilled jobs. Meanwhile, her husband lost his job and was in no hurry to find a new one. When their daughter, Alice, was born, the family's financial situation became more difficult. Both spouses were unemployed, and they had no money to pay rent, buy food, or pay for the family's basic needs. Jorge convinced Luz Maria that their only option was to temporarily move in with his parents. Luz Maria was initially hesitant, but facing no alternative and having a baby to care for, she eventually gave her consent. Luz Maria's mother was aware of the problems her daughter was facing in her marriage, but despite mother concerns, Luz Maria was optimistic that things would improve. Luz Maria assured her mother that everything would get better soon, so her mother decided to visit her and see how she was doing. However, when she went to Luz Maria's husband's house to see her daughter, she was shocked by what she found. Luz Maria was in a terrible state, eating only once a day and very little at that. This was partly due to Jorge's family not providing her with enough food, even though she was unemployed and breastfeeding her young daughter. The lack of food was only one of many problems Luz Maria faced in her in-laws' home. She was constantly belittled and even physically abused by her husband's younger brother. He was annoyed by the sound of the baby crying and the presence of children's belongings in the house. On several occasions, he threw items at Luz Maria, including a baby bottle that hit her and her daughter, Alice, who was in her arms. Despite witnessing these events, Jorge just stood by and did nothing to protect his wife and children, he treating them as if they were strangers. Morales convinces her daughter to take her granddaughter to her maternal home. Jorge arrived shortly afterwards, asking his wife to return home and promising to find a job. Luz Maria agreed, on the condition that they could rent their own apartment and live separately from Jorge's parents. After completing her education and defending her diploma, Luz Maria landed her dream job at the city prosecutor's office. As a smart, talented, and responsible young woman, she quickly earned the respect of her colleagues and began to advance in her career. As time passed, the family's financial situation significantly improved, thanks to Luz Maria's hard work and success. They were eventually able to afford a car. Meanwhile, Jorge continued to struggle with his own life, failing to find direction and instead relying on his wife's income. His laziness and jealousy intensified over time, causing tension in the household. Jorge had a volatile temper, and the situation worsened with time. Jorge was a man who preferred a life of leisure, spending most of his time at home watching TV, drinking beer with friends, and relying on his wife's income. He was extremely possessive and controlling, restricting his wife's freedom and autonomy. He wouldn't allow her to make friends, have lunch with colleagues, or even be alone without him. He constantly monitored her phone activity, checked her call history, and read her messages. He also forbade her from creating social media accounts. When they were alone at home, Jorge's behavior was just as bad. He frequently arguments, blamed his wife for all their problems, and never took responsibility for his actions. When they lived with his parents, Jorge failed to stand up for his wife, instead watching as she was humiliated, insulted, and even physically abused by his relatives. Jorge frequently resorted to physical violence in their relationship. He had a controlling attitude towards his wife, Luz Maria, and wrongly believed she would accept his abusive treatment. Their neighbors frequently heard screams coming from their house and witnessed signs of physical abuse on Luz Maria's face and body. Luz Maria had tried to leave her husband multiple times, taking their daughter and moving in with her parents. However, her husband would always show up, beg for forgiveness on his knees, and promise to change. Despite her parents' warnings to leave him, Luz Maria would forgive her husband and give him another chance. On December 15, 2020, after another violent argument, Luz Maria took their 3-year-old daughter, Alice, fled to her mother's house in tears. The next day, Jorge arrived, but it was unclear whether he was seeking reconciliation with his wife or just wanted his car back. He claimed to have found a new job and promised that their lives would improve, swearing that he would never physically harm Luz Maria again. Luz Maria believed him once more and returned to their rented apartment with her husband. In January 2021, Jorge failed to get a job as promised and stole the money Luz Maria had earned, leaving their family with nothing. Luz Maria called her mother to complain, and her mother agreed to meet with her to give her some money until she received her next salary. However, on January 19th, Luz Maria failed to show up and was unreachable by phone, which was unusual for her. Concerned for her daughter's well-being, a Morales went to Luz Maria's workplace the next day and found that she had not shown up for 2 consecutive days and had not been in contact with anyone. Around the same time, Jorge was also looking for Luz Maria. He went to the prosecutor's office claiming they had a fight and assuming she had gone to her mother's house. However, a Morales suspected that he was lying and immediately went to the police to report Luz Maria missing. That same day, a nationwide alert system was launched under the codename Isabel Claudina. This system was originally designed to facilitate urgent searches for missing young women. When the massive search began, her husband, Jorge, was immediately identified as the lead suspect. In fact, he was the only suspect. Luz Maria had no enemies, and there was no reason to believe she had been kidnapped. The last person to see her alive was Jorge himself. Jorge denied any involvement in Luz Maria's disappearance, claiming he had been searching for her and was outraged to be considered a suspect. Jorge's story had several holes in it, and he couldn't give a clear reason for not telling the police about his wife's disappearance on the same day it happened. If Jorge thought Luz Maria was at her mother's house, it wasn't clear why he didn't call or visit her there. On January 22nd, municipal workers stumbled upon the body of Luz Maria Lopez while responding to a clogged storm drain near the road. When they lifted the grate, they found the large plastic bag containing charred human remains. The workers immediately reported the discovery to the police, suspected that the body might be that of Luz Maria. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains belonged to she, and Luz Maria's parents and brother identified the body despite its severe disfigurement from fire. Notably, the body was found on the same street as the prosecutor's office where Luz Maria worked. Despite the body's severe burns, pathologists determined that Luz Maria had been severely beaten and died from asphyxia. Evidence of internal hemorrhages, fractures sustained while she was still alive, and caked blood in her nose and mouth supported this conclusion. Deep marks on her neck also indicated strangulation. At the time of the discovery of the body, no new suspects had emerged. Luz Maria's parents were convinced that their son-in-law, Jorge, was responsible for the brutal murder of their daughter. As a result, Jorge was immediately taken into custody, and investigators began to look into the motive behind the crime. Experts in psychology and criminal behavior were consulted to examine the relationships within the family and the marriage. During the investigation, Luz Maria's mother, Morales, provided an audio recording that had been sent to her anonymously by a neighbor who had witnessed their frequent arguments. The recording captured a heated argument between they, in which Luz Maria frantically screams and cries for help, accompanied by the faint sounds of a child crying in the background. Morales was deeply shocked and extremely upset by the news. She emphasized that if the witness had immediately contacted the police, her daughter might still be alive. The witness did not call the police or even visit the house where the screams originated. The police were unable to locate the anonymous person, which meant they could not be officially involved in the investigation. During an interview, Morales urged citizens to be vigilant and report instances of domestic violence to the police rather than simply documenting them. She believed that such actions could help save lives. The crime sparked widespread outrage, prompting thousands of people to take to the streets and demand justice for Luz Maria. Jorge was taken into custody, but he continued to deny his involvement, claiming he had driven his wife to work on the day she disappeared. Security footage did show their car heading in the direction of her workplace, but the tinted windows made it impossible to determine how many people were inside. Additionally, no footage showed the car stopping or Luz Maria getting out. At the house they was renting, police discovered evidence of a violent incident. There were faint blood stains and drag marks, suggesting that this was where the brutal attack had occurred. Further evidence was discovered in the trunk of the family car, where microscopic fragments of burnt human flesh were found. The investigators also became interested in a recent purchase made by a double orthopedic mattress. Specifically, they were interested in the dense polyethylene wrapping that came with the mattress. A comparative analysis revealed that Jorge had used this wrapping to package the burnt remains of Luz Maria. Additionally, several neighbors came forward as witnesses, reporting that they had frequently heard Jorge yelling at his wife and threatening to kill her. Just days before Luz Maria's disappearance, Jorge had been overheard shouting that he would kill her if she tried to leave him, and that he would hide her body so well that no one would ever find it. Criminologists used collected data and witness testimony to reconstruct the events surrounding the crime. On the night of January 19, 2021, a brutal murder took place. The day before, Luz Maria and her husband, Jorge, had a violent argument. Jorge physically assaulted her. On this occasion, his rage escalated, causing him to strike his wife multiple times. Her screams for help were heard by the neighbors, but they failed to report the incident to the authorities. The beating left Luz Maria with a broken nose and a head injury. Jorge then strangled her with his bare hands. In an attempt to dispose of the body, he dragged it to the backyard, doused it with flammable liquid, and set it on fire. However, the fire produced a significant amount of smoke and a strong odor, which Jorge feared would attract the attention of the neighbors. He quickly extinguished the flames, wrapped the charred remains in plastic, and sought a secluded location to hide the body. He believing it would never be discovered. Jorge committed a heinous crime in front of his 3.5-year-old daughter, who was old enough to partially understand what was happening. The child witnessed the beating and crime, and her cries and screams were recorded. Despite this, Jorge attempted to cover his tracks by using his knowledge of forensics, gained from his wife's textbooks, to create an alibi. He disposed of her body in a drainage sewer on a poorly lit road with no surveillance cameras. The next morning, Jorge drove to his wife's workplace, pretending to have taken her there as usual. He then began a fake search for her, contacting her colleagues, friends, and family. During the trial, Jorge's lawyers delayed proceedings and attempted to mislead the investigation. They claimed that all the evidence and witness statements were indirect and did not directly prove Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys requested that Jorge's detention be changed to house arrest, arguing that he was deeply depressed due to the accusations of killing Luz Maria he loved and the mother of his child. However, the crucial evidence came from Luz Maria's phone, which was in Jorge's possession. On the day after the crime, he sent multiple messages from her phone to different people, attempting to make people believe that Luz Maria was still alive. An analysis of the phone's movements revealed that it was consistently in the same locations as Jorge's phone. The defense team attempted to spin this evidence in their favor, claiming that Jorge had found his wife's phone and was driving around the city with it while searching for her. However, they failed to explain why Jorge was sending messages from her phone. Furthermore, bruises and scratches on Jorge's body, which were documented by experts through photographs, suggested that Luz Maria had put up a struggle. The most noticeable injury on Jorge was a scratch on his neck. However, investigators were unable to find Jorge's skin cells under Luz Maria's fingernails. Despite several questionable points in the case, the prosecutor pushed for the maximum possible sentence. The defendant was found guilty of brutally murdering his wife in October 2022. Jorge was sentenced to 50 years in prison, despite maintaining his innocence. Custody of their young daughter, Alice, was awarded to her maternal grandparents. The grandparents expressed that their granddaughter had given their lives new meaning.